He owned the company. He signed the paychecks. He sat in a glass tower 42 floors above the city and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. And he had never once, not a single time, carried a bag of someone else's food through the rain. Until tonight. Standing in a parking lot in a wet uniform that didn't quite fit, holding an insulated delivery bag and staring at an address he couldn't find. Mason Hart, billionaire, CEO, founder of one of the fastest growing delivery companies in America, was completely, utterly lost. And somewhere across the city, a woman named Emma Brooks was about to change everything he thought he understood about the life he'd built. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit like, stay until the end. This one's worth it. The rain started around 7, which was typical for Seattle in November. Not the dramatic kind of rain that makes for good movies. Not sheets of water slamming against windows or thunder rolling in from the sound. Just the gray, persistent drizzle that the city wore like an old coat. The kind that soaked through your shoes after 20 minutes and made everything smell like wet concrete and exhaust. Mason Hart noticed none of it. He was sitting in the back of a black Escalade on the 42nd floor of his own imagination, running numbers in his head. 3 consecutive quarters of declining driver retention, 12% uptick in customer complaints, and now a lawsuit. The kind that corporate communications called manageable, but kept Mason awake until 2 in the morning reading legal briefs on his phone while his daughter's nightlight cast pink shapes across the hallway. Ellie was 7. She slept with a stuffed elephant named Gerald and woke up every morning asking if today was a pancake day. It usually wasn't because Mason was usually already on the phone by 6:30. Mr. Hart. His assistant, Derek, knocked once on the office door before opening it. Derek was 26, efficient to the point of being slightly unnerving, and had the particular gift of entering a room as if he was apologizing for existing in it. The car's downstairs. Your 7 o'clock is in 20 minutes. Cancel it. Derek blinked. The board presentation? Not that one. The dinner. The thing with the investors from Phoenix. Mason stood, and the city spread out behind him through floor-to-ceiling glass. Seattle lit up wet and gold in the early dark, the Space Needle blinking somewhere in the low cloud. Tell them I had a family emergency. Is everything okay with Ellie? Ellie's fine. She's at my mother's. He pulled off his jacket, the one that had cost more than most of his drivers made in a month. He'd done the math on that recently. It made him feel sick in a way he couldn't entirely justify to himself. I need the files, the complaint reports, the ones from the driver's side, not the customer side. The ones HR keeps filing under miscellaneous operational feedback. Derek's expression shifted slightly. Those aren't really. I know what they are, Derek. Mason said it without heat, just tired. That's why I want them. The files took an hour to read, not because they were long, though there were hundreds of pages, but because Mason kept stopping. Dispatcher refused to adjust route even after I reported the road was flooded. Waited 40 minutes in standing water. No response. Customer filed complaint against me for being late. I was 7 minutes late because the address they gave was wrong. I still got docked. I asked for emergency pay advance after my car broke down. Was told to seek assistance through appropriate channels. There are no appropriate channels. They kept calling me the woman with the kid in the dispatch center, like I don't have a name. That last one he read 3 times. Mason had started Quick Haul 8 years ago out of a rented garage in Fremont with 2 delivery vans, a laptop, and the kind of reckless confidence that either makes someone a founder or a cautionary tale. He told himself, and every journalist who would listen, that he was building something different, a company that treated people right, a company that understood the people doing the work were the work. He'd believed it too. Somewhere between the Series B funding round and the IPO and the board meetings and the lawsuits and the quarterly projections, he'd stopped reading the complaint files. He'd hired people to do that. He'd built systems. He'd trusted the systems. The systems had failed the woman with the kid. He picked up his phone and called his head of operations. Renata picked up on the second ring. She always did, which was part of why he paid her very well. Mason, it's past 8. I know, I want to go undercover. A pause. A long one. I'm sorry? Driver level. I want to do actual deliveries, actual routes for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. He was already moving toward the closet in the corner of his office, where he kept a change of clothes for the nights he worked too late to go home. Nobody knows who I am, no cameras following me around, no PR angle. I want to see what the job actually looks like. Mason. Renata's voice was the careful, measured kind of careful. That meant she was choosing her words very deliberately. That's, before you tell me it's a liability risk, I already know. Before you tell me we can just commission an audit, we did that 18 months ago, and I'm holding evidence right now that the audit missed most of what matters. And before you tell me I can just talk to the drivers directly. He paused. You know what happens when the CEO asks employees to be honest? They tell him what he wants to hear. Another pause, then, you know how to drive? I know how to drive. A delivery route isn't just driving, Mason. It's, then I'll learn. He pulled a gray quick haul uniform from the back of the closet. It was the standard issue, the one they sent new hires in their welcome package. He'd kept one for reasons he'd never examined too closely. Maybe this was why. I need a name, a background, something boring enough that nobody asked questions. Renata sighed. It was the sigh of a woman who had worked for Mason Hart for 6 years and had learned that sighing was occasionally her only available form of protest. Mike Collins. And Mason, if you get someone hurt because you can't navigate a delivery route, I'll be careful. You're a billionaire who hasn't made his own coffee in 4 years. You don't know what careful looks like in this context. Then it's a good thing I'm going to find out. His first day was a disaster. Not a spectacular one. Not the kind of disaster you could tell a funny story about later. Just the grinding, humiliating kind of disaster where nothing works right, and you can't figure out why, and everyone around you seems to understand something you don't. The dispatch center was in a building off Airport Way that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Mason, Mike Collins, he reminded himself, Mike Collins, arrived 15 minutes early, which turned out to be a mistake because it meant standing in a fluorescent-lit break room while other drivers drifted in and regarded him with the particular wariness that experienced people reserve for newcomers who looked too eager. He was wearing the uniform wrong, apparently. He discovered this when a heavy-set man named Dale, who'd been driving for Quick Haul for 3 years and carried himself with the authority of someone who knew where everything was, looked him up and down and said, "You tuck it in. You're going to be sweating through it by 9. Just leave it out." "Thanks," Mason said. "You done delivery before?" "Some," Mason lied. He'd delivered things. In his 20s. Pizza, once, for about 3 weeks before Quick Haul existed and he was in between ideas. That probably didn't count. Dale looked at him with the expression of a man who had heard that particular lie before. "Sure," he said, and turned back to his coffee. The app, his own company's app, the one his tech team had spent 18 months refining, was incomprehensible from the driver's side in ways that Mason had genuinely never imagined. The route optimization was aggressive, which he'd always known in the abstract, but experiencing it from behind the wheel while rain blurred his windshield and the GPS kept recalculating meant something entirely different. He missed 2 turns in the first 30 minutes. He pulled up to an apartment building on Capitol Hill and realized the address said Unit 4B. But the building had units labeled with letters and numbers in a combination that made no sense, and there was no buzzer that corresponded to 4B. He stood in the lobby for 4 minutes. 4 minutes, and he could almost feel the delivery clock ticking in the app, counting down toward a late flag on his record. He called the customer. No answer. He called again. No answer. He left the food on the mat outside the main entrance, which was technically against protocol, and got back in his car and drove to the next address, and the next one. And by the time he finished his shift at 11:30, he had 2 late flags, 1 wrong address incident, and a complaint from a customer who said he'd rung the wrong doorbell and woken up their baby. He had, in fact, rung the wrong doorbell. Because the address numbers on the building were mounted in the dark around the side of the door, where you couldn't see them until you were already pressing the bell. He sat in his car for a long time after the shift ended. The rain came down steady and patient on the windshield. He thought about the file he'd read the night before. I asked for emergency pay advance after my car broke down. He thought about the audit his team had commissioned. the one that gave Quick Haul high marks for operational efficiency. He drove home. The second day was not much better. The third was marginally improved. On the fourth day, he met Emma Brooks. She was leaning against a battered Honda Civic in the parking lot, eating a granola bar and looking at her phone with the focused, economical attention of someone who had exactly 12 minutes of break time and intended to use all of them wisely. She was wearing the standard Quick Haul jacket, the dark gray one that turned almost black when it got wet. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked hasty, but somehow stayed in place, and she had the particular posture of someone who was tired in the bones, but would not admit it. She looked up when Mason pulled in and managed to clip the parking barrier with his rear bumper. It made a sound like a trash can being hit by a shopping cart. Emma watched this happen without expression. Then she looked back at her phone. "New?" she asked, without looking up. "That obvious? You've got the app open on your windshield mount and your insulated bags in the wrong order. Hot on the outside, cold on the inside, right? It should be the opposite. Cold outer ring, hot inner, temperature regulation." She finished the granola bar, folded the wrapper into a precise rectangle, and tucked it in her jacket pocket. "What zone are you running?" Capitol Hill and parts of First Hill." She finally looked at him. She had dark eyes and the look of someone who was deciding very quickly whether the next thing she said was worth the energy. "Those are my zones too. They gave you the Hill districts your first week?" "Fourth day, actually." "Who's your supervisor?" "Kowalski." Something moved across her face, not quite a wince. "Right." She pushed off the car. "Kowalski likes to give new people the worst zones and see how they handle it. It's his version of a job interview." She held out her hand. "Emma." "Mike," Mason said. "Mike Collins." "You eaten today, Mike Collins?" He hadn't. He'd meant to. "I'm fine. There's a decent taco truck 2 blocks up on Rainier. If you eat in your car between deliveries, you save time. And eat something that doesn't require 2 hands to hold because you'll get a call while you're eating. They always call while you're eating." She was already walking toward the dispatch window. "You want to shadow me for the first hour? Or you can keep clipping parking barriers on your own. But I'd watch out for the one near the hospital exit on Madison. It catches everyone." Mason stared after her. He'd had consultants charge him $400 an hour to tell him less useful things. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." The education was immediate and occasionally humbling. Emma drove with the focused efficiency of someone who had mapped every street in her zones inside her head, which she basically had. She knew which apartment buildings had broken buzzers. She knew which customers always answered on the second call, never the first. She knew the back entrance to the office park on Seneca that cut 6 minutes off the route. She knew which restaurants ran 5 minutes slow on their prep times, and how to factor that in so you weren't sitting in a loading zone getting ticketed. She explained all of this quickly and without condescension, the way a person explains things when they've accepted that knowledge is the currency and sharing it costs nothing. Building 7 on Eastlake. The elevator's broken, has been for 3 weeks. "You have to take the stairs to the 6th floor, she told him as they pulled into the lot. "Report it every week. They never fix it. But the woman in 6D tips in cash, which, don't tell Kowalski, but keep it. The policy on cash tips is technically against our terms, but nobody actually enforces it. And Mrs. Patterson in 6D has been a customer since we launched, and she tips 40%. "How do you know when we launched?" Emma glanced at him. "I've been here almost 4 years. I know everything about when this company launched. You get 8 stairs to the landing, then a left turn, then... Wait, 4 years?" He was following her up the stairs, insulated bag over his shoulder, genuinely surprised. "You've been driving for 4 years?" "On and off." Her voice had the slight flatness of someone who'd answered this question before and didn't love the implications embedded in it. "I took 8 months off when my son was born. Came back when my situation changed." She said, situation the way people say words that have a larger story inside them. "How old is your son?" Mason asked. 5. His name is Noah." She reached the landing, turned left. "He likes trucks. He's going to be thrilled when I tell him I drive one. Well, technically a car, but he believes it's essentially a truck. a small smile that appeared and disappeared quickly, like something she wasn't quite sure she was allowed. Knock first. The doorbell's broken too. They fell into a kind of rhythm over the next week. Not intentionally. Emma wasn't the kind of person who collected companions. She was friendly in the transactional sense of the word, the way experienced workers at a hard job tend to be. Warm enough to get through a shift, careful enough not to let anyone slow her down. But Mason was in her zone, and Mason kept making the kinds of mistakes that could get someone in her zone flagged for group inefficiency, and Emma was practical. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him on day 6, as they waited outside a sushi restaurant for an order that was running late. The rain had cleared that afternoon and left the air cold and very clean. Mason could see the lights of the city reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk. "Doing what?" "Delivery. You're not... no offense." She seemed to be choosing words carefully. "You don't move like someone who's done this before. You are clearly some kind of office person. You've got the calluses in the wrong places for this kind of work. And you hold the phone like..." She stopped. "You hold it like you're not used to being told what to do by it." Mason thought about this. "I needed to understand something," he said finally, which was both true and not the whole truth. Emma looked at him for a moment. The restaurant was steaming up her glasses. She wore them in the evenings when she was tired, she'd told him, because her contacts bothered her, and she took them off and cleaned them with the hem of her jacket, which was a gesture so completely ordinary that Mason found himself suddenly uncomfortably aware that he was lying to her. "Okay," she said. "That's a weird answer, but okay. You ever do something just because you needed to know what it felt like from the inside?" She put her glasses back on. "I had a baby at 25 while my husband decided that fatherhood was more theory than practice. So yeah, I've done things I needed to understand from the inside." She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it hit harder. "It changes you, what you're trying to understand." "It already has," Mason said. The restaurant door opened and a teenager in an apron handed out a brown bag that smelled like sesame and ginger. Emma checked the contents against the app, confirmed, handed it to Mason. "Third delivery for you," she said. "You remember the building?" "Broken buzzer, take the stairs," he said. "Unit 3A, leave the bag if no answer, but text first." "You're getting better," she told him. He was, mostly because he was actually paying attention. He met Noah on a Thursday. Emma had mentioned earlier in the week that she occasionally picked up a second shift on Thursday evenings, the late routes that ran until midnight, but that she was skipping this particular Thursday because Noah had a thing at his daycare. A little presentation. Something about community helpers, she'd said, with the tone of someone who found the phrase both sweet and slightly exhausting. Mason hadn't thought much about it until the dispatch call reassigned him to cover Emma's Thursday zone, which meant he ended up, at 7 in the evening, pulling up to Emma's building on Beacon Hill with a delivery, not one of Emma's deliveries, just coincidence of geography, and nearly running into her and a small boy on the front steps. The small boy was wearing a construction paper badge shaped like a star. It said firefighter in red crayon. "You're our delivery guy," Noah said, looking up at Mason with the direct data-gathering stare of a 5-year-old who had already formed opinions and was currently revising them. "I am," Mason said. "Mama said our building gets deliveries sometimes. Are those our deliveries?" "Not this time. This one's for 4C." He looked at Emma, who was watching this exchange with an expression that hovered between amusement and something more guarded. "Nice badge." "I got it today," Noah said, "because I drew the best fire truck. Want to see?" "Noah," Emma started. "I'd like to see it," Mason said. Noah produced a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket with the pride of someone presenting a major work. It was a fire truck. It was also, genuinely, quite good for a 5-year-old. The wheels were round, the ladder was depicted in reasonable proportion, and there were small squares that represented windows. There was a dog hanging out of one window that Mason was fairly certain had not been part of the original assignment. "Who's the dog?" he asked. "That's Rex. He's the fire dog. All fire trucks have dogs." "They don't all..." Emma began. "I believe you," Mason said to Noah. Noah grinned. He was missing a front tooth and had his mother's dark eyes and the unselfconscious delight of a child who was still operating in a world where most things were okay. Mason felt something move in his chest. Not dramatically, not like a movie moment. More like a sound you weren't expecting in a quiet room. He thought about Ellie. He thought about her pink nightlight and Gerald the elephant in Pancake Days. "I gotta get this to 4C, he told Noah. "But that's a really good truck." "Thanks," Noah said cheerfully. And then with the social instincts of someone who had already decided a person was okay, "You should come for dinner sometime. Mama makes really good pasta." "Noah," Emma said, more firmly. "What? He seems nice." "He's a delivery driver, not a dinner guest." "He could be both," Noah said, with the reasonable confidence of someone who had not yet learned that the world resists this kind of logic. Mason looked at Emma. She was trying very hard not to smile, which was funnier than if she had just smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she confirmed, and took Noah firmly by the hand and steered him toward the door. And Mason could hear Noah asking, with increasing volume, whether Mike could come for dinner on Friday, and Emma's increasingly determined deflections, all the way up the front steps. He stood on the sidewalk longer than he needed to before he went to deliver to 4C. It was around this time, day 9, day 10, that Mason stopped thinking of the investigation as the primary thing. He still documented what he saw. He took notes in a secure app on his phone every evening, careful observations about route structures and dispatcher behavior, and the specific grinding inefficiencies that cost drivers time and money. He kept files. He was building a case the way he'd always built things, methodically, with evidence. But the notes were starting to include other things. The way Emma's voice changed when she talked about Noah, warmer and slightly exasperated in the way of parents who love their children so completely that the love itself is occasionally overwhelming. The way she handled the rude customers, of which there were more than he'd imagined, with a kind of patient, practiced deflection that kept all the necessary warmth on the surface while putting the actual hurt somewhere unreachable. The way she ate her lunch standing up next to her car, because sitting down for 20 minutes was time she didn't feel she'd earned. He wondered who had taught her that, the not sitting down. Whether it was the job or the years before the job or some combination of everything that had told her her time and rest were things she had to justify. He knew about the ex-husband now. Not the details, but the shape of it. His name was Ryan. He was supposed to have Noah every other weekend. He had Noah approximately every fourth or fifth weekend, depending on work stuff and scheduling conflicts that Emma relayed with the flat, scrubbed tone of someone who had stopped expecting different and was purely in the business of managing reality. "Does he pay child support?" Mason had asked once, carefully, not looking at her. A pause. "He's supposed to." He left it there. He knew about the student loans, like 2 years of community college before Noah, abandoned when the pregnancy came and money got complicated. He knew about the second job she'd had until 6 months ago, doing data entry in the evenings after deliveries, until the company moved their operations overseas and eliminated the position. He knew about the car, which had a transmission making a sound that Emma described as a sound with aggressive casualness, as if the more offhandedly she mentioned it, the less it would cost to fix. He had more than once considered just paying for it, anonymously. He had the contacts, the means, a dozen ways to do it without Emma ever knowing. He didn't. Partly because she would somehow figure it out, and he suspected the consequences of that would be significant. Mostly because it felt wrong in a way that was hard to articulate, like trying to fix the symptom while the cause was still running, still breaking things, still producing documents filed under miscellaneous operational feedback. He sat with that feeling. It was unfamiliar. He'd spent most of his adult life in the belief that problems had solutions, and the correct response to a problem was to deploy resources toward the solution. He was very good at this. He'd built an entire company on this. Emma's situation wasn't a problem with a resource solution. Or it was, but it was also the product of 100 decisions made by 100 people, including Mason himself, including the systems he'd built and the culture he'd allowed to grow inside them. You couldn't fix that with a check. You had to fix the thing that was making the checks necessary. He was starting to understand, in a way he hadn't quite before, what that actually meant. Kowalski called him in on day 12. The supervisor's office was a small room off the dispatch center that smelled like burned coffee and printer toner. Kowalski was a large man with a face designed by years of boredom and mild authority, and he looked at Mason with the assessing expression of someone who was going to find something to dislike regardless of what he found. "Collins," he said. "Sit." Mason sat. "Your metrics have improved," Kowalski said. This sounded like a compliment and was not. "You were bottom 15% first week. Now you're middle of the pack. That's fine." "Thank you." "You're spending a lot of time running routes with Brooks. She knows the zones well. I've been learning from her." Kowalski picked up a pen, set it down, picked it up again. The pen maneuver of a man who liked the appearance of deliberation. "Brooks is a decent driver, also a talker. Tends to make friends with new people. Not always good for either party." He gave Mason a look that was meant to communicate something Mason was supposed to understand. "This job's easier if you keep your head down and your routes clean. Friends slow you down." Mason considered several responses. He chose, "I'll keep that in mind." "Also," Kowalski looked at his screen, "you're making the apartment on Madison with the bad elevator every shift. You flagged it 4 times in the system. The elevator's been broken for 3 weeks. It's a safety concern. It adds, I heard you the first time you flagged it." "Then why?" "Because," Kowalski said, with the patience of someone explaining something to someone they've decided is slow, "we don't own the elevator. The building owns the elevator. Our job is to deliver the food. Your job specifically is to deliver the food without generating incident reports that go to regional." Mason looked at him. "So the drivers just keep climbing 6 floors. That's how stairs work, Collins." He walked out of the office very carefully because he was holding some things that wanted to come out of his mouth, and they were not things Mike Collins would say. He drove 2 blocks, pulled over, and sat for a few minutes. Then he called Renata. "Tell me about the Madison Avenue building complaints," he said. "Which?" "The flagged maintenance issue, the elevator. It's been logged 4 times in the last 3 weeks." A pause, the sound of keys. "Mason, there are thousands of—" "Find it." Another pause. "Okay, I see it. 3 flags. The 4th one just came in, which is—" "That's you, isn't it?" "Who does the flag go to?" "Regional Ops. They forward to Property Management Liaison if they determine it's—" "Who reviews the determination?" A very long pause. "There's a review backlog," Renata said quietly. "Regional Ops is running about a 6-week backlog on property flags." 6 weeks. The volume, Mason said, is created by the fact that we keep sending drivers into buildings with problems and then creating a system for them to report the problems that doesn't actually result in the problems being fixed." He stopped, started again. "Emma Brooks has climbed 6 flights of stairs in that building 14 times in the last 3 weeks. Because the system says to log it and wait." Silence. "Fix the backlog," Mason said. "Not eventually. This week. And find me the names of every building in active rotation with unresolved property flags older than 2 weeks. Everyone." "Mason, this week, Renata." He hung up, looked at his hands on the steering wheel for a moment. Then he drove back to the zone. The night everything shifted was a Friday. They'd been assigned a double run. 2 restaurants, a long loop from South Lake Union down through the International District and back up through Capitol Hill. It was a cold night, just above freezing, with a wind that found the gap between your collar and your jaw. Emma had brought coffee in a thermos, which she produced from the back seat with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone who had learned that small things were the things that actually mattered. "Noah asked about you again," she said, handing Mason a thermos cap filled with coffee. "Yeah?" He was watching the road, trying not to show how much this mattered, which was a strange and unfamiliar problem for him. "He wants to know if delivery drivers get to keep the cars when they retire." She sipped her own coffee. "I told him probably not. He's worried about you, where you'll go." Mason laughed, an actual laugh, short and real. "Tell him I'll manage." "I did. He said you should get a dog." He's very focused on dogs right now. She was quiet for a moment. He doesn't have a lot of men around. His dad is... He's around when he's around. And when he's not, he just sort of isn't. She said it simply, looking out at the rain-wet street. Noah attaches to people fast. Gets it from me, probably. It's not always a great quality. Sounds like a great quality, Mason said. She turned to look at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened slightly, like a door moved by wind. Mike, she said carefully, what are you actually doing here? Delivering food, he said. You know what I mean. He kept his eyes on the road. The GPS was telling him to turn left in 400 feet, and he was grateful for the distraction. I told you, I needed to understand something from the inside. And have you? Understood it? He thought about Kowalski and his pen. He thought about the 6 flights of stairs and the 6-week backlog. He thought about the woman in the complaint file, the one they called the woman with the kid, the one who finally had a face now, and a thermos, and a son who worried about dogs. More than I expected to, he said. Emma was quiet for a moment. The heater in her Civic was working overtime and losing, and their breath occasionally fogged the air between them. You're not just a driver, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer immediately. The GPS said turn left, and he turned left, and they drove for a few seconds in the specific silence of a conversation that was about to go somewhere that neither of them had fully prepared for. I'm trying to be, he said finally. For right now. That's the honest version. She absorbed this. Emma Brooks was, he had learned, extremely good at absorbing things without reacting immediately. It was one of the qualities that made her both excellent at her job and slightly unreadable. She would take something in, hold it, turn it around, and then respond with whatever she decided was true. Okay, she said finally. Okay. You're trying to be. That counts for something. She picked up her coffee. First building. You take it. I'll keep the car running. 6 floors, remember? I remember, Mason said. He took the stairs 2 at a time. He stayed in character for 15 more days. In those 15 days, he rode out a dispatcher meltdown that left 6 drivers stranded without rerouting assistance for 40 minutes. Documented it. Watched a customer scream at Emma in the lobby of a building on First Hill, calling her lazy, careless, incompetent because her soup had arrived cooler than he wanted. Emma apologized with grace she absolutely did not owe him. Mason stood 2 steps behind her and kept his face perfectly neutral while something burned very steadily behind his eyes. Documented it. Helped Dale, the heavyset man from day one, change a flat tire at 11:15 at night in a parking lot off Rainier with no roadside assistance from the company app, because the roadside assistance function was, it turned out, decorative. Fixed the policy on roadside assistance the next morning from his actual office at 5:45 a.m. before coming back to the dispatch lot. Did not document this. Did not admit to this. Could not figure out how to explain it, even to himself. Had dinner with Emma and Noah. The dinner had happened because Noah had asked every day for 2 weeks, and Emma had finally, with the resigned sigh of a woman who had been outmaneuvered by a 5-year-old, extended the invitation. It was pasta. She'd been right. It was really good pasta. Noah had explained at length his theory that fire trucks needed dogs, and also that delivery cars should have a compartment specifically for dogs, and Mason had agreed with more sincerity than the situation probably required. He sat in Emma's small apartment afterward, Noah asleep, 2 mugs of tea on the table between them, the sound of rain on the window, and thought that this was the first evening in years that he hadn't been on his phone. Emma was watching him. You look like someone who's not used to sitting still, she said. I'm not, really. What do you do when you're not working? Take care of my daughter, he said. He hadn't mentioned Ellie before. It came out before he decided to let it. Emma's expression changed slightly. How old? 7. Her name's Ellie. He stopped. Started again. Her mother died when she was 3. Car accident. He said it the way he'd learned to say it. Direct, without pause, because pauses made people feel like they had to fill them with apologies. So it's just us. I'm sorry, Emma said anyway, quietly, which was different from the apologizing kind of sorry. It was the kind that just acknowledged. She's great, he said. She likes elephants and pancakes and is currently very concerned about whether mermaids get cold. Emma smiled. A real one, not the careful version. Noah wants to know if dinosaurs could swim. I told him some of them could. Now he wants to move to the ocean, just in case. Just in case of what? In case the dinosaurs come back. He wants to be friends with them. He's not afraid of much. She said this last part softly, like someone describing something both dear and slightly heartbreaking. Mason looked at her across the table, in her small apartment on Beacon Hill, with the rain outside and the sound of her son breathing in the next room, and knew, very clearly and without drama, that he was in a significant amount of trouble. Not the company investigation kind. The other kind. The kind that made the other kind feel suddenly smaller. He drove home at 10:30. The rain had stopped. The city was wet and quiet, and the streetlights made the puddles glow yellow-orange. And Mason Hart drove through Seattle in a car that cost 3 times Emma's annual salary and thought about the weight of what he was holding. He had what he needed. He had more than enough documentation to make the changes he'd come undercover to make. He could end this tomorrow. Call Renata, call legal, prepare the announcement, walk back into his own company as himself, and begin the hard work of fixing what was broken. He needed to end it. Every day he stayed was another day he wasn't telling Emma the truth. And Emma, who gave her patience and her knowledge, and her carefully rationed trust to the people who showed up and did the actual work, deserved the truth. She had earned the truth. He sat in his driveway for a while. Ellie's room was lit up pink through the upstairs window, which meant his mother was late putting her to bed. Mason got out of the car and stood in his own driveway, in his quick-haul uniform, looking up at his daughter's light. He'd built something real, something that employed thousands of people, that moved millions of meals, that had started in a garage with 2 vans and a reckless idea. He was proud of it. He'd had reasons to be proud. But pride was a bad compass. He'd learned that in the last 23 days, in stairwells and parking lots, and in a woman's kitchen over pasta, more clearly than he'd learned it in 8 years of running a company. He went inside, kissed Ellie's head. She didn't wake up. He sat at his kitchen table with his investigation notes spread in front of him and started writing the speech he'd need to give. It was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done in front of a crowd. Not the announcement, not the reforms. The look on Emma's face when she figured out who he was. He could see it already. And it kept him at the table until nearly 2 a.m, writing and rewriting, trying to find words that would hold the weight of what he was about to break. He didn't find them. He went to bed and lay awake until 4 and then slept badly, with the particular guilt of someone who is about to do the right thing in the wrong way, and knows it, and cannot figure out how to do it differently. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks out. He told Renata to move it up. The meeting was moved up to a Friday. Mason had given Renata 4 days' notice, which was not enough time for logistics, and more than enough time for Mason to regret the decision approximately 40 times. The company-wide all-hands was scheduled for the main distribution hub off Airport Way, the same building where the dispatch center was, the same fluorescent-lit parking lot where Emma had watched him clip a parking barrier on day 4 and decided, with characteristic pragmatism, that he was worth saving. He had not told Emma. He had not told anyone in the driver pool. That was the point. That was the only way to ensure that what happened in that room would be real, unscripted, not managed by PR or softened by advance warning. He needed the truth of the room. He needed the people in it to be exactly who they were before they knew he was watching. He was aware of the hypocrisy in this. He sat with it every morning over coffee he now made himself, in his kitchen at 6 a.m., wearing the quick call uniform because he was still running routes right up until the day before. He had not stopped. He'd thought about it. Renata had strongly suggested it, legal had cautiously suggested it, and the voice in his own head that sounded suspiciously like responsibility had also suggested it. But every time he sat down to make the decision to stop, he thought about Dale's flat tire. He thought about Kowalski's pen. He thought about Emma climbing 6 flights of stairs with a delivery bag over her shoulder because the system had a 6-week backlog. He kept running routes. On Thursday, his last day in the field, he and Emma covered the South Lake Union to Capitol Hill Loop. It It was a clear night, which was unusual for November in Seattle. Cold and dry, with a sky that actually had stars in it if you looked at the right angle away from the city light. Emma had noticed this during a stop outside a Thai restaurant on East Lake, tilting her head back briefly, just for a second, while they waited for an order. "You know what Noah told me this morning?" she said, still looking up. "That fire trucks need dogs? That stars are just holes where the sun shines through from the other side." She leveled her head, pulled the collar of her jacket up. "He got that from a cartoon. I told him that wasn't exactly how astronomy worked. He said, 'Well, it should be, Mama.'" Mason looked at the sky. "Honestly, that's a better system." She laughed. "The real one, not the polite professional version. The one that was shorter and more sudden, and that she seemed mildly surprised by each time it happened, like it had arrived without permission." "Don't tell him that. He'll put it in his science journal." "He has a science journal?" "A notebook with a rocket on the cover that he calls his science journal. Currently contains 2 drawings of dinosaurs, a list of things that are red, and what I think is either a map of our building or a very small country." She took the order from the restaurant window, checked it, handed Mason the bag. "You do the Eastlake building. I'll take the one on Dexter." "The Dexter one has the broken intercom, I know. Ring twice, wait, ring again. The building manager figured out that the 3rd ring still registers." She was already moving toward her car. 15 minutes. I'll be back." He watched her go and then stood there a moment longer than made practical sense, holding a bag of Thai food, listening to the city. He was going to miss this. Not the deliveries, the ache in his shoulders at the end of a shift, the app rerouting him into traffic, the cold that got into his hands by 10 p.m. Not any of that. This. The parking lots and the brief warmth of a Thai restaurant doorway and the 15-minute windows, and Emma knowing which buildings had broken intercoms and 3rd ring workarounds, all of it in her head, all of it accumulated through 4 years of showing up and paying attention. He took the stairs to the Eastlake building, and he paid attention to how his own legs felt by the 4th floor, and he delivered the food, and he came back down, and he did not think about tomorrow. He thought about it anyway. The morning of the all-hands, Mason woke up at 4:45 and lay in bed staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes before accepting that sleep was done with him. Ellie was at his mother's for the weekend. He'd kept her out of the city for this. Not because he was superstitious, but because if things went sideways, if the day became the kind of day that followed him home, he wanted to be able to handle it without her watching. He showered, made coffee, put on the quick haul uniform out of reflex, and then took it off again. He stood in his bedroom in his undershirt looking at the suit laid out on the chair, the gray one, the one he wore to things that mattered, and felt the distance between those 2 versions of himself more acutely than he had in 23 days. Mike Collins wore the uniform. Mason Hart wore the suit. He put on the suit. Renata had arranged everything. The facility's main floor, usually a staging area for delivery vehicles, all concrete and chain link and the smell of oil, had been cleared and set up with rows of chairs and a platform at one end. Company communications had sent out a mandatory all-hands notice 2 days ago, keeping the agenda deliberately vague. Leadership updates and company direction, the kind of language that made people uneasy without telling them why. About 400 people were expected. Drivers, dispatchers, warehouse staff, zone coordinators. The office employees, corporate, tech, legal, were joining via video stream from the main building downtown. Mason had made this choice deliberately. Today was not for the office. Today was for the people who carried the bags. He arrived through the front entrance at 8:15 and the shift in the room was immediate. He heard it before he saw it. A kind of collective exhale, a reduction in ambient noise, the particular silence of a room recalibrating, then the whispers. Then someone near the back said something he couldn't make out, and the person next to them turned around, and the turning spread through the rows like a slow wave. He walked to the platform. He did not have notes. He'd written 3 drafts of a speech and deleted all of them because they all sounded like something a CEO says when a PR team has signed off on it, and he did not want that version of today. He stood at the edge of the platform and looked at the room. It took him a moment to find Emma. She was in the 4th row, near the aisle, because Emma Brooks always sat where she could get out quickly. He'd noticed this about her: the seat nearest the door, the table nearest the exit, the parking spot that gave her a clean line back to the street. She was wearing her regular jacket, dark gray, and she was sitting with her arms crossed, and her expression completely still in the way that meant she was already processing something she didn't have all the information on yet. She didn't see him look at her. She was watching the platform with the careful attention of someone who had learned through experience that company announcements were rarely good news for the people sitting in folding chairs. He looked away, started talking. "My name is Mason Hart. Most of you know that name as something on your paychecks. About 25 of you know it as the name of the guy who was running routes in the Capitol Hill and First Hill zones under the name Mike Collins for the last 23 days. The silence changed quality. It went from tense to something that had no good word, the sound of a room full of people whose understanding of the last several weeks was simultaneously rewriting itself. In the fourth row, near the aisle, Emma went very still. He kept going. He had to keep going because stopping now would be worse than whatever came next. "I started Quick Haul 8 years ago because I believed delivery work was undervalued and underprotected. I told that story to every journalist who would listen. I believed it. Then I hired people to manage the operations, built systems to track the metrics, and stopped asking whether the story I was telling matched what was actually happening on the ground." He paused. "It didn't. I have 3 weeks of first-hand evidence and about 400 pages of complaint documentation to prove it. And I'm going to tell you what I found, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do about it." He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the elevator on Madison Avenue and the 6-week review backlog. He talked about the dispatcher who left 6 drivers unrouted for 40 minutes during the South Lake Union meltdown, and how that dispatcher was still operating without any corrective action because the incident had been classified as a technical disruption rather than a management failure. He talked about the roadside assistance function that existed in the app but had a resolution rate of 22%, which meant that 78% of drivers who requested it were managing breakdowns on their own, on the side of roads, at night, without help from the company whose logo was on their jacket. He talked about the culture. This was the part that the room felt in a different way. The metrics and the policy failures, those produced nods, the grim recognition of people hearing their experience named out loud. But the culture part made people sit differently in their chairs. 2 weeks ago, he said, I was assigned to deliver to our corporate headquarters. Evening shift, service entrance. I was in the building during a late executive meeting. I won't identify specific individuals today. That process will happen through HR with full documentation. He stopped, steadied himself. But I heard drivers referred to in that meeting the way you'd refer to equipment. And I watched a specific driver, a woman who had been with this company for 4 years, who has driven more combined mileage than most of our regional managers have ever thought about, get mocked. In a room full of people who are employed because she and people like her show up every single day. The room was so quiet that Mason could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Her name is Emma Brooks. He hadn't planned to say the name. He'd specifically told himself not to. It was her story, her dignity, her right to decide what got said out loud about her. But it came out, and he couldn't take it back, and he didn't look at the 4th row. And she handled it better than I did, because I was in that room and I said nothing. I made a calculation. The investigation, the evidence, the reforms, they all required me to stay undercover a little longer. So I stayed quiet, and I watched, and I documented it, and then I walked out of there. He put his hands flat on the podium. That's not something I'm proud of. I want to be clear about that. I can justify it as a tactical decision. I can't justify it as a human one. And the work of the next several months starts with me acknowledging that. He looked up. He looked at the room. He still didn't look at the 4th row. So here's what changes. Not as a proposal, not pending board approval. These are decisions I've already made, and I'm announcing them today because the people in this room deserve to hear them before the press does. He listed them. Emergency pay advance system, live within 60 days. Roadside assistance with an actual human response guarantee. Property flag review reduced from 6 weeks to 72 hours with immediate escalation protocol. An independent driver advocacy office reporting directly to the board, staffed by people chosen by drivers. Route protection. No more gaming the metrics to create the appearance of efficiency while burning through the people producing it. And a wage adjustment, retroactive to the quarter's start. for every driver who'd been reclassified in the last 18 months in a way that reduced their rate, a list that Renata had pulled, that Mason had sat with until 11 p.m. the night before, a direct payment, not a settlement, a correction. The room broke then. Not into applause exactly. It was more complicated than applause. Some people were clapping. Some people were crying. A few people were doing both, which is the way of things, when you've waited a long time to be seen, and suddenly someone is looking directly at you. Mason stood at the edge of the platform and took it in. Then he looked at the fourth row. Emma was gone. He found her in the parking lot. She was standing next to her battered Honda Civic, keys in her hand, not unlocking it. Just standing. The morning was cold and the sky had gone the pale gray of Seattle in late November, and Emma was very still in the middle of the parking lot, the way a person goes still when they have too many things happening at once inside them and none of them have resolved yet. He came out through the side door, the one near the service entrance, and he said her name. She turned around. She looked at him for a long moment. The expression on her face was not one he could categorize. It wasn't anger, or it wasn't only anger. It was the particular look of someone whose reality has just been restructured around them without their consent, and they are standing in the new version of it trying to figure out which pieces still belong to them. "You own the company," she said. "Yes." "You've owned it the whole time." "Yes." She nodded slowly. It was the kind of nod that isn't agreement, it's processing. "And the routes, the complaints you filed, the elevator." "I filed 4 flags, and then I called Renata and told her to fix the review process." "From your actual office?" "At 5:45 in the morning, before I came back to the dispatch lot." Another nod. She looked down at her keys, then back up. "And you knew about that night at headquarters?" He didn't pretend not to understand which night. "Yes." "You were in the room." "In the back, near the service corridor." He held her gaze because he owed her that. "I heard everything they said." Her jaw tightened, just briefly. "And you didn't say anything?" "No." "Why not?" It wasn't a question quite. It was the kind of statement that opens a space and expects you to fill it honestly. "Because if I'd said something, I would have had to explain who I was. And if I explained who I was, the investigation ended. The evidence, the real documented pattern, goes away. They write it off as a founder having a reaction to one incident and nothing changes." He stopped. He'd rehearsed versions of this sentence and none of them felt adequate, and this one wasn't either. That's the tactical reason. And it's true. And it's also not the whole truth. "What's the whole truth?" "I froze," he said. "I'm telling you the calculation I made afterward, when I had time to make it. In the moment I froze. I watched them do that to you, and I was furious, and I froze." Emma looked at him. The parking lot was emptying slowly, other drivers drifting out from the meeting, some of them glancing over at the two of them with the particular avoidance of people who sense a private conversation they should not interrupt. "Mike?" she said, and then stopped, shook her head. "I don't even know what to call you." "Mason." "Mason." She said the name experimentally, like trying on something that didn't quite fit yet. "For 23 days." "Yes." "You let me teach you your own app." "Your app is better than mine," he said. "The driver-side interface is terrible. I'm having it redesigned." Something moved across her face. Not a smile, not quite, but adjacent to one. And then it was gone. "That's not..." She pressed her lips together. "This isn't funny. I know it's slightly funny, but it's not." "I know." "I told you things." Her voice had dropped slightly. "About Ryan. About Noah. About the car and the loans and the second job and..." She stopped. "I thought you were just some lost office guy who ended up driving for reasons I shouldn't ask about. I gave you the benefit of the doubt because..." She stopped again. "Because that's who you are," Mason said quietly. "Don't." The word came out flat and clear. "Don't explain me to myself right now. I'm really asking you not to do that." "Sorry." He meant it. She looked away toward the street where a delivery van was pulling out into the thin morning traffic. She watched it go. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. She was holding her keys so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. "The pasta dinner," she said. "Emma, Noah asked you if you had a dog, and you said no. And he told you that you should get one and that he knew the best kind, which is a golden retriever, specifically a golden retriever named Captain. And you said—" She closed her eyes briefly. "You said you'd think about it." "I remember. He's going to ask me about you." She opened her eyes. They were bright in a way that was not quite crying, but was adjacent to that too. "He's 5. He doesn't understand organizational deception. He's going to ask where Mike is, because to him there is a Mike who came for pasta and agreed about Captain, and I'm going to have to explain—" She stopped, pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth. "I'm going to have to explain something I don't entirely understand myself." Mason stood in the cold parking lot and felt the weight of this in a way he hadn't quite anticipated. He'd anticipated her anger. He'd anticipated the accusation of manipulation, which was fair, and the sense of violation, which was also fair. He hadn't quite anticipated the logistics of Noah. "What can I do?" he asked. He knew, even as he said it, that it was the wrong question, the kind that tried to fix before it understood. "Nothing," she said. "Not today." She unlocked the car. "I have to pick up my son." "Emma." She stopped with her hand on the door, didn't turn around. "The reforms," he said. "The driver advocacy office, the wage corrections. None of that is contingent on any of this. On you. It's happening regardless. I want you to know that." A long pause. "I know," she said. "That's the part that makes it complicated." She got in the car. "Goodbye, Mason." She drove away without looking back. He stood in the parking lot for a while. The cold came through his suit jacket, which was not designed for standing outside in November, and he didn't move. He watched the spot where her car had been, as if that accomplished anything, which it didn't. Then he went back inside. The weeks after the announcement were, professionally, the most complex of Mason's career. The board was unhappy in the specifically careful way that boards express unhappiness. Not loudly, not with obvious objection, but with the quiet, sustained pressure of people who have financial stakes and opinions about how those stakes should be managed. The wage corrections alone represented a significant quarterly cost. The Independent Driver Advocacy Office was, in the words of one board member, structurally unusual. The retroactive payments were, in the words of the same board member, a potential precedent they should all think very carefully about. Mason heard all of it. He took the meetings, sat in the rooms, listened to the concerns. He didn't change any of it. There were 2 board members who'd been in the company since the Series A round, 8 years ago, when Mason had pitched them in a conference room in Soho, with a deck he'd built himself and a level of confidence that, in retrospect, had been partially performance. Those 2, Patricia Welch and a man named Osai, who rarely spoke and when he did was almost always right, said nothing in the meetings. They signed where they needed to sign and voted the way the math required, and afterward Patricia sent Mason a text that said simply, "About time." He saved that text. Media coverage came fast and loud, the way it always does when a story has a clean narrative arc. Billionaire goes undercover. Billionaire finds injustice. Billionaire rides in and fixes everything. Several journalists specifically used the word rescue. One called it a Cinderella story for the gig economy, which made Mason feel tired in a way he couldn't fully articulate. There was no Cinderella. There were 400 people who had been doing difficult work for years and were now, finally, going to have the policies they'd always deserved. That was not a fairy tale. It was a correction. The difference mattered. He gave 3 interviews and declined the rest. He said, in all 3, that the reforms were the result of work done by drivers over years of documentation and complaint. He named the complaint system. He named the rate of reports going unresolved. He did not name Emma Brooks. She had not contacted him. He had not contacted her. Renata had, with considerable delicacy, informed Mason that Emma had been approached about participating in the driver advocacy office formation process, and that Emma had said she would consider it and had asked whether participation was in any way connected to her relationship with Mason Hart personally. "What did you tell her?" Mason asked. "That it was not," Renata said, "because it isn't." "Good." She said she'd think about it. Good, Mason said again. He was sitting in his actual office, in his actual chair, looking at his actual city through floor-to-ceiling glass, and it looked the same as it always had, wet, gold, lit up against the dark. And he felt entirely different inside it, like something had been moved in him and not put back in the same position. He was still Mason Hart. He still ran a company. He still had a board that was quietly irritated with him and a PR team that was carefully navigating a news cycle and a legal team that was reviewing everything for liability. He also had Ellie, who came home from his mother's on Sunday and immediately wanted to know why he smelled different. Different how? He'd asked. Like rain, she'd said, with the diagnostic certainty of a 7-year-old, and someone else's car. He'd taken her for pancakes. She told him about Gerald the elephant's recent illness, a stomachache, she diagnosed, brought on by eating too many pretend strawberries. And Mason had listened with the full attention he hadn't always managed before, and thought about Emma's science journal with the rocket cover and a list of things that are red. Dad? Ellie had looked up from her pancakes. She had his eyes, which he was aware of in the way parents are aware of things their children inherit. Not proud exactly, just struck by it occasionally. Are you okay? Yeah, Bug. I'm okay. You look like when you're thinking about work, but it's actually not work. He'd looked at her. What does that look like? Like you forgot where you put something important. She speared a piece of pancake. You should look harder. He had no response to this. He stole a piece of her pancake instead, which was the correct parental deflection, and she protested loudly, and the moment passed. But he thought about it later. Like you forgot where you put something important. He thought about it more than was probably useful. Dale called him. Not his CEO number, his Mike Collins number, the dummy phone he'd used for the undercover period, which he'd kept active mostly because he wasn't sure what to do with it yet. He answered out of reflex. Heard it was you, Dale said. He had the particular phone voice of someone who rarely calls, a little too loud, slightly formal in a way that would dissolve after 30 seconds. Mike, or whatever. Mason, Mason said. You can call me Mason. Huh. A pause. Feels weird. Yeah. The elevator on Madison, Dale said. They fixed it. I know. Yesterday, 4 guys came and did the whole thing in about 5 hours. Another pause. Been broken 8 months, not 3 weeks, by the way. Emma just didn't start logging it until 3 weeks ago because she didn't think anything would happen. Mason closed his eyes. 8 months. Yep. Dale said this without accusation, just the flat delivery of a fact that had its own weight. The guys who did the repairs, one of them told me they got an emergency work order, priority flag, said they'd never seen a maintenance escalation move that fast. The system changed, Mason said. Must have. A brief silence. Then Dale said, the retroactive pay thing, for the reclassified drivers. Yes. I was reclassified 14 months ago, when they changed the zone structure. Mason already knew this. He'd seen the file, he'd known it for 2 weeks. The correction goes out in the next payment cycle, 42 days from now. Silence on the line. Long enough that Mason thought maybe the call had dropped. Okay, Dale said finally. His voice had changed slightly. Not softer, but less armored. Okay. I wanted to ask in person, but I didn't know how to, ask the CEO stuff. He paused. You're okay for the record. As a driver, you were terrible. As a whatever. The other thing. You're okay. Thank you, Dale. Don't make it weird. The line went quiet for a moment. Emma's not doing great, just so you know. I'm not telling you that for any reason. Just, she's a friend. And she's not doing great. Mason sat with this. How do you mean? She's doing everything the same. Routes, shifts, the whole thing. That's how she does it. When stuff gets hard, she just does everything exactly the same. He seemed to be thinking as he talked. Which is usually a good system for her. Usually. But usually the hard stuff isn't something she thought she understood and then turned out not to. Dale's voice had the careful quality of a man saying something he's thought about. She doesn't do well with that, when she thinks she's got a read on something and it changes. She trusted me, Mason said. He wasn't asking. She doesn't trust easy, Dale said. And when she does, he didn't finish the sentence. Anyway, I just thought you should know. I don't know what you do with that. Neither do I, Mason said honestly. Yeah, that's a you problem. Dale said it without cruelty. You seem like someone who can figure it out. Eventually. The call ended. Mason sat in his car, his actual car, not the delivery vehicle, the Escalade, sitting in the parking structure under his building, and thought about Emma running the same routes on the same schedule and doing everything exactly the same. He thought about what it cost a person to do that. He thought about what she'd said in the parking lot. I told you things. Not the anger, not the accusation. The simpler, harder statement. The one about what trust looks like when it moves in one direction and finds out there was a wall. He stayed in the parking structure for a while, which was not productive, and then he went up to his office. He had a company to rebuild. That was the thing he could do. That was the thing he understood how to do. He put everything he had into it. The days and the meetings and the hard conversations with the board and the harder conversations with the operations team. The ones where he had to tell people who had been running things a certain way for a long time that the way had changed and the change was not negotiable. It took more than it usually did. Not because the work was harder, though it was hard, but because every time he sat in a meeting about driver welfare policies, every time he reviewed a complaint log and saw the correction noted in the system, every time he talked to Renata about the advocacy office and the candidates who were being considered and the timeline for standing it up, he was also thinking about Emma, not in a way he could act on, not yet, maybe not for a while, but the way you think about something that you put down in a place where you can still see it, the way a person thinks about a door they've closed but haven't locked. He kept working. And in a small apartment on Beacon Hill, on a cold Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the parking lot conversation, Emma Brooks received a letter. Not an email. An actual letter, in an envelope, with a quick haul return address. Inside was a single page. Official company letterhead, formal language, the kind legal had drafted, inviting her to participate in the formation of the Driver Advocacy Office as a founding member. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it on the kitchen table where she could see it, and she made Noah's lunch and helped him find his left shoe, which was under the couch again, and drove him to daycare, and drove herself to the dispatch lot for her morning routes. She thought about it the entire way there. She was still thinking about it when she pulled into the lot and sat for a moment in her running car, the heater going, looking out at the building that had, for 4 years, been the center of her working life. On the seat next to her, she'd put the letter before she left home. She looked at it now, in its neat fold. She did not like what had happened. She did not like that she'd been deceived, even by someone who had, she could admit in the complicated privacy of her own thoughts, decent reasons for the deception. She did not like the feeling of having had her trust repurposed. She did not like any of the things she'd replayed in the weeks since the parking lot, all the small moments she'd now read differently. The way he'd asked about Noah, the way he'd listened, the look on his face in her kitchen over 2 cups of tea like someone who wasn't used to being still and had found it unexpectedly. She did not like the part of herself that understood those moments had been real, even though the context around them had been wrong. She picked up the letter. Read it once more. The Driver Advocacy Office would meet twice monthly. Its mandate was to review policy changes, flag emerging issues, and report directly to the board. Founding members would have full access to complaint data, operational metrics, and proposed changes before implementation. The salary for the founding coordinator was listed at the bottom. Emma read the number. She read it again. It was more than she'd made in the last 2 years combined. She sat in her car in the parking lot for another full minute. Then she put the letter back on the seat, got out of the car, grabbed her delivery bag from the back seat, and walked toward the dispatch window. She didn't make any decision that morning, but she didn't throw the letter away. And in the calculation of where Emma Brooks was at that moment, that was not nothing. She said yes to the letter on a Wednesday, not dramatically. There was no moment of resolve, no clear morning when she woke up and knew. It was more like the letter had been sitting on her kitchen table for 11 days, and every morning she moved it slightly to put down Noah's cereal bowl, and every evening she moved it back, and at some point the moving of it back became a decision she'd already made without quite authorizing it. She called the number on the letterhead and spoke to a woman named Renata, who had a voice like someone who had managed complicated situations for a long time and had learned to project calm the way other people project authority. Renata explained the role, the meeting structure, the reporting line. She did not mention Mason. Emma did not ask about Mason. The conversation was professional and specific, and when it ended, Emma sat for a moment with her phone in her hand and thought, "Okay then," she told Dale the next morning in the parking lot. He was eating a breakfast sandwich from the gas station across the street, which he did every morning and which Emma had long stopped commenting on. He listened to her explain the role without interrupting, which was unusual for Dale, who had opinions about most things and expressed them before you finished the sentence. When she finished, he said, "You taking it?" "I just said I called them." "That's not the same as taking it." She pulled her jacket tighter. The morning was gray and damp, the kind of damp that isn't rain but is also not dry. "It's a good role," she said. "It's work that actually, She stopped. "The things they're changing. Someone should be in the room making sure they actually change them. Someone who knows what the job is like." "Someone who knows what the job is like," Dale repeated, slow and deliberate. "Don't. I'm not doing anything. You're repeating things back at me in that voice. This is my regular voice." He finished the sandwich, folded the wrapper. "You talked to him?" "No." "You going to?" "The role doesn't require it. Renata said the advocacy office reports to the board, not to Emma. I'm taking the job because it's the right job." She picked up her bag. "That's the whole answer." Dale looked at her with the expression of someone who has opinions he is, with considerable effort, keeping to himself. "Okay," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you." She started toward the dispatch window. "And Dale, if you say anything to anyone about the other part—" "What other part?" he said, and turned back toward his car. She walked into the building, got her route assignment, and drove her zones. She thought about the role the whole time, which was better than thinking about the other thing, which she was not going to think about. She thought about what it would mean to sit in rooms with people who made decisions and to be the person who said, "Here is what that decision looks like on a Tuesday night when the elevator is broken and the order is running late and the customer is already composing a one-star review in their head." She thought about the 400 pages of complaint documentation that Mason had mentioned at the all-hands, and whether any of those pages sounded like things she'd filed, and whether they'd gone somewhere useful or into the 6-week backlog where things went to become statistics. She pulled up to the building on Eastlake, the one with the fixed elevator, new as of 6 weeks ago, and pressed the button and listened to it hum and arrive and open its doors, and she stepped in and rode it to the 6th floor. And the very ordinary fact of this made something move in her chest that she categorically refused to examine. She delivered Mrs. Patterson's order. Mrs. Patterson was 72 and lived alone and always answered the door in a bathrobe, regardless of the hour, and tipped in cash because she'd decided years ago that the app tips were too invisible and wanted to hand the money directly to the person. She handed Emma a folded 20 and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." "Long week," Emma said. "Sit down for 5 minutes. I've got 4 more deliveries." 5 minutes won't change anything. Mrs. Patterson opened the door wider with the authority of a woman who had stopped asking permission for things somewhere around her 60th birthday. "Come in. I have coffee." Emma stood in the hallway for a moment. The delivery clock was ticking in the app. She had 4 more stops and the route was optimized, and 5 minutes would not, technically, break anything. And she was so tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. She went in. Mrs. Patterson's apartment was small and very warm and smelled like coffee and something baked, old furniture and books stacked in ways that suggested organization schemes that only made sense to the person who'd made them. Emma sat at the kitchen table and accepted a cup of coffee, and Mrs. Patterson sat across from her and didn't ask questions, which was the best possible thing she could have done. "My late husband," Mrs. Patterson said after a while, "was a man who didn't know how to tell the truth about himself. Not because he was dishonest, because he was afraid of what would happen if people knew who he actually was. She looked at her coffee cup. He worked on it, spent most of our marriage working on it, got better at it, eventually. She paused. The working on it was the important part, not the arriving. Emma looked at her. I didn't say anything about, you didn't have to. Mrs. Patterson picked up her cup. You've had the same face for 2 weeks, different kind of tired from route tired. Emma sat with this. Outside, the city was doing its gray November thing, and somewhere in her car, 4 more deliveries were waiting, and the delivery clock in the app was patient and indifferent. He lied to me, Emma said. It was the first time she'd said it plainly to anyone who wasn't Dale. Not about small things, about what he was. Did it change what you knew about him? It changed the context of everything. That's not the same thing. Mrs. Patterson said it gently but without apology. What you knew, the person you watched do things, that doesn't unwrite itself because the name was wrong. Emma drank her coffee. It was very good coffee, the kind made by someone who had decided that was one thing they were going to do properly, regardless of circumstance. It's not that simple. I know it isn't. Mrs. Patterson stood, moved to refill the cups. Most real things aren't simple. That's how you know they're real. She sat back down. The man I married couldn't say what he meant for the first 6 years we were together. Made everything harder than it needed to be. I was furious about it. Still am sometimes, and he's been gone 11 years. She settled back into her chair. But I also watched him try. Every day, trying to get better at being honest. And that counted. That counted a great deal. Emma set down her cup. She looked at her hands, which had the small calluses of years of this work, and a thin white scar on her left thumb from a kitchen accident she barely remembered. Real hands, evidence of actual time. I have to finish my routes, she said. I know you do. Mrs. Patterson didn't move to show her out, just gestured slightly toward the door. Same time next week? Same time next week, Emma said. She rode the fixed elevator down and got back in her car and finished her routes, and didn't let herself think about the conversation until she was home. Noah asleep, the apartment quiet in that particular way of apartments after children go to bed. Suddenly and completely still, as if the noise had been a physical thing that left with them. She sat at the kitchen table. She didn't think about Mason, exactly. She thought about what it looked like when someone was trying to get better at being honest, whether she'd know it if she saw it, whether she'd seen it already and hadn't let herself call it what it was. She went to bed without resolving anything. That was okay. Resolving things took time, and Emma Brooks had, through years of practice, gotten decent at living alongside unresolved things. It was not her preference, but it was a skill. The way climbing 6 flights of stairs without losing your breath was a skill. You got good at it because you had to. The first driver advocacy meeting was on a Thursday in December. The office quick hall had designated for the advocacy group was on the 3rd floor of the Airport Way building, recently renovated, the smell of new carpet still present, which Emma registered and said nothing about. There were 6 founding members. Emma, a driver named Tomas, who'd been with the company 5 years and had more incident reports filed than anyone, and somehow still had the disposition of a person who thought things could improve. A woman named Grace, who was also a dispatcher, and brought the inside view of how routing decisions actually got made. 2 drivers from the East Side zones whose names were James and Priya, and Dale, who had been nominated by the driver pool through a process that seemed to Emma both slightly chaotic and entirely appropriate. Renata ran the first meeting. She presented the advocacy office's mandate, the reporting structure, the cadence of meetings, the process for escalating issues to the board. It was organized and efficient in the way of someone who had run many meetings and anticipated the questions that were going to slow things down. The questions that slowed things down were mostly from Dale, who was constitutionally incapable of accepting a process without understanding it at a level of specificity that made other people in the room shift in their chairs. Emma watched Renata navigate this with what she privately acknowledged was impressive patience. At one point, during a discussion about the complaint review timeline, Dale said, "Who reviews the reviewers?" Renata looked at him. "I'm sorry?" "The complaint flagging system saw you said there's a new review committee. But who decides if the committee is doing it right? What's the accountability structure above the committee?" The room went slightly quiet. Emma looked at her notepad. She'd been thinking the same thing and had written it down and was waiting for a moment to raise it, and Dale had just raised it in his particular bulldozer fashion. Renata paused. That's a genuinely good question. The answer is that it's currently in development, which I recognize is not a satisfying answer. It's an honest answer, Emma said. We can work with honest. Renata looked at her. Something passed between them that was not quite a conversation, an acknowledgement of some kind, a mutual recognition that they were both people who operated in the same complicated space around the same complicated person, and that they were going to have to make it work. The long-term design of the accountability structure, Renata said carefully, is something this office should have direct input on. That's exactly the kind of thing you should be here for. Dale seemed satisfied by this, or at least sufficiently satisfied to move on. After the meeting, when the others were filing out, Renata caught Emma in the hallway, not blocking her path, just present in a way that made it clear she'd timed it deliberately. "Can I have a moment?" Renata said. Emma looked at her. "If this is about, it's not. Or, it touches on it, but it's not what you might think." She kept her voice low, professional. "I've worked for Mason for 6 years. I've watched him build this company from something that barely existed into what it is now. And I've watched him be, for most of that time, very good at the things that are easy to measure and not great at the things that aren't." Emma said nothing, waited. "The undercover period wasn't my idea," Renata said. "For the record, I thought it was a liability risk and probably unnecessary. I thought we could get the information through an audit." She paused. "I was wrong. Not about the liability. That part I was right about. But about the information. The audit wouldn't have gotten him that." She looked at Emma steadily. "It also wouldn't have gotten him the other thing. Renata, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you something I think you should know, and then I'm done with the topic." She straightened, professional again, the brief opening closing as efficiently as it had appeared. "He fired 2 people from the corporate headquarters team last week. The ones from the meeting. The ones you didn't know he was watching." Emma went still. HR handled the formal process, but the decision was his, and he made it the morning after the announcement. Renata held her gaze. He didn't include it in the press release. He didn't make it public. He just did it. She paused. "I thought you should know." She moved past Emma toward the elevator. Emma stood in the hallway for a moment. The new carpet smell was still there. Down the hall, she could hear Dale asking James a follow-up question about zone restructuring that had probably not been part of today's agenda. She went home, picked up Noah from daycare, made dinner, helped him find the left shoe, always the left one. They had established an ongoing mystery around this that Noah found delightful and Emma found professionally baffling, and read him 2 chapters of a book about a dog who wanted to be a firefighter, which Noah considered excellent literature. After he went to sleep, she sat at the kitchen table again. The letter was gone. She'd filed it. The table was just a table now. She put her hands flat on it and thought about 2 people, unnamed and now unemployed, who had laughed in a room while Emma walked out with her chin up. She didn't feel satisfaction exactly. She felt something quieter and less clean than satisfaction, something that required her to sit with it for a while before she understood what it was. It was the feeling of having been seen, retroactively, of someone having been in a room, having witnessed something, and then doing something about it even without an audience, even without her knowing. She didn't know what to do with it. She was still figuring it out when Noah called from his room that Gerald the elephant had fallen out of bed, and could she come fix it? And she went and fixed it, and by the time she came back to the table, the feeling was still there, smaller now, but present, like a light left on in another room. Ryan called in the 2nd week of December. He called on a Sunday, which was his weekend to have Noah, which meant he wasn't having Noah because otherwise he would not have been calling. Emma knew this before she picked up. She picked up anyway because she'd learned that not picking up just meant a later call with more apology layered on top, and she preferred the direct version. "Hey," Ryan said. He had the voice of someone who had already pre-apologized to himself and found it sufficient. "So this weekend?" "It's fine," Emma said. "I have this work thing. Ryan, it's fine." She was standing in the kitchen looking at Noah through the pass-through, where he was on the living room floor with his dinosaur figures arranged in what appeared to be a complex social situation. Just tell me when you're planning to reschedule. Maybe next weekend. I'd have to check. Let me know when you know. She watched Noah move a large green dinosaur to a new position, consult it briefly, apparently receive a satisfactory response. He's fine. He asks about you. A pause that Ryan filled with the particular quality of silence that was its own kind of answer. He made a new friend, Emma said. She hadn't meant to say it. At school. A kid named Marcus who also likes trucks. They've been comparing notes. She stopped. He's doing well. I want you to know that. I'm glad. Ryan's voice had shifted slightly. Not guilty exactly, but adjacent. You're doing a good job with him, Emma. I know I am, she said, not unkindly. Another pause. I heard something about your company. There was stuff in the news. It's being handled. The CEO went undercover? That's pretty... It's being handled, Ryan. She said it evenly, the way you say things when you're done discussing them. Let me know about next weekend. She hung up and stood for a moment with the phone in her hand, and the dinosaur social situation in the living room continued without her, and Noah looked up and said, Was that Dad? Yeah, baby. Is he coming? Emma set the phone down on the counter. She came to the living room door. Not this weekend, no. He's got a work thing. Noah looked at the green dinosaur in his hand, turned it over once. Okay, he said, with the particular acceptance of a child who has heard this before and has developed a filing system for it. Not devastated, not even disappointed in the way she'd feared, just noted and filed. Can we get pizza tonight? Sure, Emma said. Yeah, we can do that. She sat down on the floor next to him. He showed her the dinosaur situation. It was, he explained, a party, and the orange dinosaur was the host, and the green dinosaur had just arrived late, which was embarrassing but acceptable because he'd brought a gift. The gift was a rock that Noah selected from a collection by his knee. What kind of party? Emma asked. A birthday party. For Marcus Dinosaur. He pointed to a small blue one. Marcus Dinosaur is 5. Like Marcus at school. Happy birthday, Marcus Dinosaur. He wants cake. Do dinosaurs eat cake? I think they eat whatever makes the story work. Noah considered this with the seriousness of a scholar. Then, yes, they eat cake. He put the green dinosaur next to the blue one. Mike would know what kind of cake dinosaurs like, he said casually. Emma went still. It was not the first time Noah had mentioned him. It was the 4th time, each mention arriving with the same breezy certainty, like bringing up a fact that everyone agreed was relevant. The delivery man who came for pasta, who agreed about Captain the Golden Retriever, who had looked at the fire truck drawing with actual attention and said he'd think about the dog. What makes you say that? Emma said carefully. Because he knew about Rex the fire dog, and that was a made-up thing, and he still knew it was right. Noah moved the orange dinosaur a fraction to the left. People who know about made-up things know about cake. Emma sat on the floor of her living room on a Sunday afternoon in December, surrounded by plastic dinosaurs, and thought about the fact that her 5-year-old had just made an argument that she couldn't entirely refute. He's not a delivery driver anymore, she said. Noah looked up. What is he? It's complicated. Noah processed this. Is he still nice? She thought about the elevator, the complaint files, the 2 people who no longer worked for the company, the letter with the salary at the bottom that she'd accepted and not folded back up. The way he'd said I froze in the parking lot, which was the most honest thing she could imagine anyone saying in that situation, and which had cost him something visible to say. Yeah, she said. I think so. Then it's not that complicated, Noah said, and returned to the birthday party. Emma sat on the floor a little longer. The party continued. The pizza came eventually. Noah ate 3 slices and declared the evening a success and fell asleep 40 minutes past his bedtime, which Emma counted as a reasonable Sunday outcome. She lay awake for a while after, in the dark, with the familiar sounds of her apartment around her. The building settling, the occasional car outside, the refrigerator cycling, and thought about the word complicated and how children moved through it, and adults camped inside it. She wasn't ready. She didn't know if ready was even the relevant metric. She just knew that the letter on the kitchen table was filed and the elevator on Madison worked, and there were 6 people in a room on the 3rd floor of a building trying to make things better for 400 others, and she was one of them. That was something to hold on to while the rest sorted itself out. The second advocacy meeting was the hard one. Not procedurally. Procedurally, it ran fine. Better than the first, the group finding its rhythm, Dale's questions becoming less about establishing dominance and more about actually getting to the answer. Tomas turned out to have a quiet, systematic intelligence that made him invaluable in the room. He remembered everything, connected things that didn't seem connected, and asked the questions that took the conversation to the level it needed to be at. The hard part came at the end, in a discussion about the new emergency assistance program. The program existed now. Mason had announced it, and Renata had implemented it. Drivers who needed emergency funds could apply through the app and receive a response within 24 hours. The fund was capitalized at $2 million, renewable quarterly. Emma had reviewed the initial policy document before the meeting and had 3 pages of notes. The qualification criteria, she said when the discussion opened. The form requires proof of employment status, proof of income for the past 90 days, and a written explanation of the emergency. She looked at the page. That's 3 documents and a personal statement for an emergency. Grace, the dispatcher, nodded immediately. The form was built by legal. I know it was built by legal. It's built to protect the company from abuse. Emma set the page down. But think about who's applying for this. Someone whose car broke down at 11 at night. Someone whose kid is sick and they need to cover a copay. Those people don't have 90 days of income documentation sitting on their phones. She looked around the table. They have the emergency. That's what they have. Tomas tapped his pen on his notepad. What's the alternative? No documentation requirement opens it to misuse. A streamlined attestation, Emma said. You state the emergency, you state the amount, you confirm employment through the app, which already knows your employment status. It's connected to the same system. That's it. The documentation can be gathered afterward within 30 days as a check, not as a barrier to access. James leaned forward. And if someone abuses it? Then you flag it, you recover the funds, and you remove their eligibility for future access. She looked at the page again. If we build this program for the fraudulent minority, we fail the honest majority. And the honest majority is who we're here for. The room was quiet for a moment. Dale looked at her with an expression that was as close to impressed as Dale's face typically went, which was not very close but was recognizable. That's the version we should be presenting to the board. That's why we're in this room, Emma said. After the meeting, she stayed to finish her notes while the others trickled out. She was the last one left when the door opened again. Mason was standing in the doorway. He was in a suit which she'd only seen him in once before, the day of the announcement. He looked like himself, which was the version of him she was still recalibrating to, the one that went with the name and the glass tower and the 42nd floor. He also looked slightly uncertain, which was the version she recognized. Renata said you were still in here, he said. She's very informed, Emma said. She looked back at her notes. This isn't a scheduled... I know, I was in the building for a board thing. I'm not here officially. He stayed in the doorway. He didn't come in. I wanted to ask, and you can say no, and it won't affect anything. If you'd be willing to talk. Not about the advocacy office, not about work. Emma kept her eyes on the page. About what then? I don't know exactly. A pause. About the fact that I handled everything wrong and I know I did, and I want to understand, not fix, just understand what it actually cost. From your perspective. She put down her pen. She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway of a room she was in charge of, in a building he owned, and he had asked her for something instead of telling her, and he hadn't come fully through the door, which she was aware was a small thing, but was not actually small. It was the specific body language of someone who understood they were entering on someone else's terms, or not at all. I have to pick up Noah in an hour, she said. That's enough time. She studied him. The uncertainty was still there. Not performed, not the kind that's deployed to seem harmless, just the real kind that a person carries when they're asking for something they know they might not get. Close the door, she said. and sit down." He came in. He sat across the table from her, 2 chairs down from where she was sitting, which was also a choice she noticed. Close enough for a conversation, far enough for space. "Okay," Emma said. "Here's how it felt." She told him. Not everything, not all at once. She was not a person who did everything all at once. But the main things. The way it felt to have trusted her, read on a person and been wrong not about the person, but about the entire context. The specific humiliation of that, distinct from the original humiliation at headquarters, because the headquarters thing she'd handled, she'd walked out with her head straight and her dignity intact. She knew how to do that. But the parking lot thing, finding out she'd been seen and hadn't known she was being seen, that one was harder. "You were watching me," she said, "the whole time, taking notes." "I was taking notes on the company. You were part of what I saw." That's a distinction that doesn't feel very different from the inside. "I know," he said. "I know that." She looked at him. "And the dinner?" "I shouldn't have come to the dinner." He said it without qualification. "I knew who I was. You didn't. That wasn't fair. It was something I wanted, and I let what I wanted override what was right. And I don't have a justification for it." She'd expected him to try to justify it. The lack of an attempt to do so sat in the room between them for a moment. "You wanted something," she said. Not a question. He was quiet for a few seconds. "Yes." "That part," Emma said carefully, "is the part I understand the least. I know what you were doing in the company. I understand the investigation, the documentation, the reforms. It all makes sense. But the dinner..." She paused. "Why did you say yes to the dinner?" He looked at his hands. "Because Noah asked." "Mason." "Because it was the first evening in a long time that I wasn't managing something or performing something. I was just sitting in someone's kitchen and the food was good, and Noah had a theory about fire trucks, and I kept thinking I should leave, and I couldn't make myself." He looked up. "That's the honest version." Emma sat with this. Outside the window, the December sky was doing its gray thing, and somewhere across the city, her son was finishing his afternoon at daycare, probably engaged in a complex diplomatic situation involving the block corner. "I'm not ready to... whatever you're hoping for," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking for anything. You're here. I came to ask if we could talk. That's what I asked for. That's all I'm asking for." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without flinching, which was either courage or practice, and Emma suspected it was some combination of both, with the proportion shifting toward one or the other, depending on the day. "The emergency assistance program," she said. "The qualification criteria." He blinked slightly, followed her. "Yes?" "My office is recommending a streamlined attestation model. I need your sign-off to fast-track it before the next board meeting." He was quiet for a beat, then, "Send it to Renata. I'll review it tonight." "Tonight?" "Tonight," he confirmed. She picked up her pen, went back to her notes. "I have to finish before I pick up Noah." "Right." He stood. He moved toward the door. She did not watch him go, but she was aware of the movement, the way you're aware of things in your peripheral attention when you've been paying close attention to something for a while and are trying to stop. "Emma." She looked up. He was at the door. "Thank you for talking to me." She nodded once, not warmly, not coldly. Somewhere in between, where the real things lived. He left. She sat for a moment after the door closed, in the room that smelled like new carpet, and the particular kind of December afternoon that felt like it wanted to snow, and probably wouldn't. Then she finished her notes. She sent the attestation proposal to Renata at 4:47 p.m. At 6:12 p.m., while she was warming up leftover pasta for Noah's dinner, her phone buzzed. A message from an unsaved number she recognized. Approved. Full implementation by January 15th. Good work. She looked at it for a moment. "Mama?" Noah said from the table. "The pasta is making a noise." She put the phone face down on the counter and went to stir the pasta. "It always makes a noise," she said. "It's talking," Noah said confidently. "It's saying it's ready." "Is it?" Emma said. "Yeah." He arranged his fork. Some things take a while to be ready, and then they tell you. Emma stirred the pasta and said nothing, and thought about how 5-year-olds moved through the world with such relentless accidental clarity, and whether it was possible to learn that as an adult, or whether you just had to stand near someone who had it and let it reach you slowly. She served the pasta. Noah ate it with enthusiasm, and told her about Marcus and the block corner and a new theory about whether submarines could also be used as space shuttles if you made a few adjustments, which he was prepared to discuss at length. She listened. She was, she thought, getting a little better at that. The listening part. The sitting still and letting something arrive without managing it first. It was not a comfortable skill, but it was the right one for where she was, in December, in a small kitchen on Beacon Hill, with pasta and a 5-year-old and an unanswered question she wasn't ready to answer yet. She thought she might be getting closer to ready. She wasn't going to rush it. The Emergency Assistance Program went live on January 14th, one day ahead of schedule. Emma found out through the app, not through a message from Mason, not through an official announcement to the advocacy office, but through the regular driver update notification that went to every Quick Call employee at once. The same way everyone else found out. She was in her car, stopped at a light on Rainier when the notification came through, and she read it at the next red light, and she sat with it for a moment, in the particular way of someone receiving information they were expecting, but whose arrival still lands with weight. The streamlined attestation was in. The 30-day documentation follow-up was in. The 24-hour response guarantee was in. The fund amount was larger than the original proposal, $2.8 million, not $2 million, with a quarterly review mechanism tied directly to usage rates rather than to a fixed budget cycle. She texted Tomas. "It's live." He responded in 40 seconds. "I know." Dale called me. He's insufferably pleased with himself. She put the phone down and drove to her first delivery. It was a Friday. The January air had gone from the damp cold of December to the dry, sharp kind that got into your ears and made the city feel cleaner than it actually was. Everything bright-edged and slightly too awake. She ran her routes, and the routes were the same as they'd always been except for the elevator on Madison, which she still registered every time even when she was trying not to, the hum of it arriving like a small, persistent fact. At noon, she ate in her car, a habit she hadn't broken and wasn't sure she wanted to, the 20-minute windows being a kind of privacy she'd come to value. She'd moved from the gas station sandwiches she used to buy at the start of shifts to leftovers she packed in the morning, which was a change that had happened incrementally and which Noah had facilitated by requesting that his lunch always match hers, which meant she had to make an actual lunch, which meant she was eating actual food at noon instead of whatever was available. She was thinking about this, the small logistics of how children improve you without meaning to, when her phone rang. Not Mason, Ryan. She answered. "Hey." He sounded different from the December call, less preemptive in his apology, less immediately smoothing. "I've been thinking about next weekend." "What about it?" "I want to take Noah." He said it more firmly than he usually said anything. "I want to actually do it. Not, I know I've said that before, and then the work thing. Ryan. I'm serious this time. Emma, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I know I haven't been." He stopped, started again. "I haven't been there the way I should be, for him. And I keep telling myself I'll do better next time, and then there's a next time, and I do the same thing." A pause that had actual discomfort in it. "I don't want to keep doing that." Emma was quiet for a moment. Outside her windshield, a pigeon was investigating the parking lot with unreasonable optimism. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Yes, come get him Saturday morning. Have him back Sunday evening. He likes waffles for breakfast, and he will tell you he doesn't need a nap, but he does. He just needs it to not be called a nap. Call it resting time, he'll do it." She paused. "And he's been very interested in whether submarines could become space shuttles. I'd have an answer ready." A silence on Ryan's end that contained several emotions she could identify without effort. "Thank you," he said finally. "It's not for you," Emma said, not harshly, just accurately. "I know." She hung up and ate the rest of her lunch and thought about what it meant that she'd said yes without the usual interior calculation. the weighing of risk against Noah's disappointment, the contingency planning for Ryan not showing up. She just said yes, because the alternative was a wall, and Noah needed a door, and she was the one who had to decide which one to build. She was getting better at the door version. She didn't examine the connection between this and the December conversation in the advocacy office, but it was there. But the board meeting in late January was the first one Mason had attended since the announcement where the room didn't feel like a negotiation he was losing. Not because the board had changed its mind about the cost of the reforms. Patricia Welch had presented projections showing the driver retention improvement offsetting a significant portion of the program expenditure, and those projections had been received with the cautious optimism of people who'd been expecting a harder number. Osei had asked 3 precise questions and seemed satisfied with all 3 answers, which was the closest Osei got to enthusiasm. But there was still the question of the Driver Advocacy Office's most recent report, which Renata had distributed 2 days before the meeting, and which contained, among its recommendations, a proposal for route restructuring that would, in the short term, reduce delivery efficiency by an estimated 4%. 4% was not a small number when multiplied across the company's operational scale. The board member who'd called the advocacy office structurally unusual, his name was Gerald Fitch, which Mason had always found vaguely ironic, given that Ellie's elephant had the same name, raised this point with the precision of someone who had been waiting since page 6 of the report to raise it. The route restructuring recommendation, Fitch said. Walk me through the advocacy office's rationale. Mason had read the report 3 times. He knew every line of it. The current route optimization prioritizes delivery speed at the expense of driver time windows. The restructuring proposal builds in buffer time between deliveries, 10 to 15 minutes per route segment. The projected 4% efficiency reduction assumes current volume, but the driver retention data shows us that our turnover rate drops significantly when drivers have adequate time windows, and replacing a driver costs approximately, I've read the cost analysis, Fitch said, then you know that a 4% short-term efficiency reduction is offset within 2 quarters by reduced onboarding and replacement costs. Mason set his copy of the report on the table. And that's before factoring in the quality improvement. When drivers aren't racing a clock that's set to fail them, the delivery quality metrics go up. Customer satisfaction goes up. Complaint rates go down. That's a projection. Yes, it's a projection based on pilot data from our Portland zone, where we ran the buffer time model for 6 weeks last quarter. He looked at Fitch steadily. The data is in Appendix B. I direct your attention to the retention curve specifically. Fitch opened the report. He was quiet for a moment. Patricia Welch, across the table, was looking at the same page, and her expression was doing something that was not quite approval, but was moving toward it. The advocacy office prepared this, Fitch said. The advocacy office prepared the recommendation. My operations team did the data modeling. The pilot was Renata's idea. Mason paused. The original observation, that the time windows were the core problem, came from one of the founding members. She'd been noting it in complaint logs for 2 years. He didn't say Emma's name. He didn't need to. The board approved the route restructuring pilot expansion at the end of the meeting. 4 zones to be added in Q1, with a full rollout contingent on the 2-quarter retention data. It was not a complete win. It was a provisional, data-dependent, revisit in 6 months kind of win, which was how real things moved in institutional environments and which Mason had made peace with over a career of fighting for the second-best version of the right idea. He called Renata from the parking structure afterward. Board approved the pilot expansion, he said. I know. I was on the video feed. A pause. Emma's report did the heavy lifting. Her observation did. Her report organized it. There's a difference. He unlocked the car. Is she... He stopped. She's fine, Renata said, with the neutrality of someone who knows exactly what question she just answered and chose to answer the smaller version of it. I wasn't asking. Mason. He sat in the car. I don't know how to do this, he said. It came out more directly than he'd intended, which was probably appropriate given the context. Renata was quiet for a moment. This was unusual. Renata was not typically a person who needed a moment. You've been doing it, she said finally. For 2 months you've been doing exactly what you should be doing. You're just not getting credit for it, and you're not used to that. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. Another pause. She's not a problem you can solve, Mason. She's a person who's deciding something. Those are different processes and they don't respond to the same tools. She sounded almost gentle, which was its own kind of alarming from Renata. Do the work. That's what you have. The rest is her timeline, not yours. He drove home. Ellie was awake. It was a Friday. Her bedtime was nominally 8:30, and in practice was whenever she fell asleep during whatever she was watching, which tonight was a documentary about deep-sea creatures that she found intensely interesting and that Mason found slightly unsettling. He sat on the couch next to her, and she leaned against him without breaking eye contact with the television, and he put his arm around her and watched a bioluminescent something drift through black water on the screen. "Dad," she said during a lull. "Yeah." "What's your favorite animal?" He considered. "Probably a dog." "We should get a dog. We've talked about this." "Gerald wants a friend." She gestured toward the elephant, which was wedged between the couch cushions. "He gets lonely when I'm at school." Mason looked at Gerald. Gerald had the serene expression of a stuffed animal that had strong opinions about being lonely. "Gerald is stuffed," he said. "His feelings are real," Ellie said, with absolute confidence. "Can we get a golden retriever?" Mason went still. Ellie looked up at him. "What?" "Nothing. Who told you about golden retrievers?" "Mrs. Kim at school has one. His name is Biscuit." She turned back to the TV. "I think we should get one and name it Captain." The coincidence sat in the room like a small, pointed thing. "We'll see," Mason said. "That means yes," Ellie said. "It means we'll see." She leaned back against him, apparently satisfied with this ambiguity. The deep-sea documentary moved on to anglerfish, which Ellie found beautiful, and Mason found like something from a different world entirely. He sat there until she fell asleep against his shoulder, which took about 20 minutes, and then he carried her to bed and tucked her in and set Gerald next to her, and stood in the doorway for a moment the way parents do, taking the specific inventory of a sleeping child, the breathing and the stillness and the total vulnerability of someone who trusted you absolutely with all of it. He thought about Emma doing this every night, alone, after routes that ran until 11, after Ryan's weekend cancellations, and the student loans and the car with the sound that was a sound. Doing the inventory of Noah every night and then getting up the next morning and doing the whole thing again. He thought about what that cost over 4 years, and what it built in a person, and whether someone who'd built that kind of endurance in themselves could trust someone else with any of it. He didn't have an answer. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in a while. February arrived with a cold snap that turned the usual Seattle drizzle into something that occasionally threatened to be actual snow without committing to it, which was both typical of the city and, Emma had always thought, a reasonable metaphor for a number of things. She was 3 months into the advocacy role now, still running routes 2 days a week on her choice, not a requirement, a decision she'd made because she wanted to stay connected to the work in the physical sense, the way you can understand something in your head and understand it completely differently in your legs. The advocacy office had agreed and Renata had arranged it, so her 2 route days were treated as field research, which was both accurate and a generous interpretation of what was essentially Emma not being willing to stop. The 3rd advocacy meeting had produced a revised dispatcher accountability protocol. The 4th had generated a formal recommendation about temperature equipment replacement cycles. The insulated bags that drivers used had an effective lifespan of about 18 months, and the company's current replacement policy was 30 months, which meant drivers were running routes with bags that didn't hold temperature properly, which meant food arrived at wrong temperatures, which meant customer complaints that became driver metrics issues. It was the kind of problem that was invisible from the top and completely obvious from the ground, and the advocacy office had documented it in 8 pages with supporting data that Tomas had assembled with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had been waiting a long time to write it down. The insulated bag replacement cycle was changed to 16 months, retroactive to current inventory, replacements rolled out by end of Q1. Dale had, upon receiving his new bag, held it up and looked at it for a long moment, and then said, "Huh," which was Dale's version of a standing ovation. Emma was also, with the formal efficiency of someone who had been running at reduced financial capacity for too long, getting herself sorted. The advocacy role salary had changed things, not dramatically, not in the way that made problems disappear, but in the way that made problems addressable. The student loans, which she'd been making minimum payments on for years, got their first double payment in February. The car transmission, the sound that was a sound, went to a mechanic she'd been putting off for 4 months. The mechanic told her it was a $300 fix, which was exactly the kind of information that landed differently when you could actually address it. She did not feel rescued. That was the important thing. She felt like she'd been given better tools for work she was already doing. There was a distinction, and it mattered. Noah started asking about Captain the dog with renewed frequency in February. Emma was not sure where this had restarted, possibly daycare, possibly a book, possibly the inexplicable neural processes of a 5-year-old that operated on their own schedule and required no external input. He drew several pictures of Captain. Captain was consistently gold-colored and large, and wore what appeared to be a small hat, which Noah maintained was a captain's hat, and was therefore both thematically appropriate and necessary. She found one of the drawings on the refrigerator one morning and stood in front of it for a moment, holding her coffee, looking at the large gold dog with the small hat. She took out her phone. She looked at the unsaved number she'd been looking at for 2 months without calling. She put the phone back in her pocket and went to wake up Noah. She was not ready yet, but she was closer than she'd been in December, and that was the direction that mattered. The thing that moved her, the specific thing, the one she identified afterward as the actual moment, happened on a Tuesday in late February, and it had nothing to do with Mason directly, which was probably why it worked. She was in the airport way building for a meeting that ran long, and afterward she took the stairs because she'd eaten at her desk, and sitting in an elevator for 20 seconds felt like too much stillness. On the second-floor landing, she heard voices from the break room, the small one near the dispatch center, the one with the ancient coffee maker and the bulletin board that still had a paper notice about a holiday party from 2 years ago. She recognized one voice as Kowalski's. The other, she didn't. She wasn't eavesdropping. She was passing through a hallway. The door was half open. Kowalski was saying, "It's all politics. The CEO has a guilt complex, comes in here playing delivery driver for 3 weeks, sees whatever he wants to see, and now the whole operation is getting restructured around, what, feelings?" The other voice said something she couldn't hear. "The advocacy office is a PR move," Kowalski said. "Give the drivers a room to sit in and call it policy change. Meanwhile, the actual operations people, the ones who've been running this efficiently for years, we're the ones adjusting every 6 weeks to whatever the CEO decided after his little field trip." Emma stood in the hallway. She thought about walking past. She did in fact walk past. She made it 3 steps further toward the exit. Then she stopped. She went back. She pushed the door fully open. Kowalski looked up. The other person, a dispatcher she didn't recognize, probably knew, looked between them and immediately found something to look at on their phone. "The advocacy office," Emma said, "has implemented 5 policy changes in 3 months. The insulated bag replacement cycle, the emergency assistance program, the route buffer time pilot, the dispatcher accountability protocol, and the property flag review timeline." She kept her voice level, which took more than she was willing to show. "Those aren't feelings. Those are metrics. If you want the data, it's in every board report since November, which, as an operations manager, you have access to." Kowalski looked at her. His expression was the one she'd seen in his office on day 12, when he told a new driver that friends slow you down. The mild, practiced authority of someone who has never been seriously challenged in a room they consider theirs. "Brooks," he said, "this isn't... I know it's not a good time. It's also not something I'm going to walk past." She held his gaze. "The people you're managing are the reason this company functions. They have been for 8 years, including the years before anyone was paying attention to whether they were okay. They're not a variable in your efficiency equation. They're the people who make the efficiency possible." She paused. "If that's a problem for you, I'd suggest you take it to HR, because it's company policy now. In writing, signed by the board." She left. She walked to her car. She sat in it, Her hands were shaking slightly, which happened sometimes when she held something in and then released it, not from fear she'd established, but from the effort of the holding. She'd been doing the holding for a long time, since the night at headquarters when she'd walked out with her chin up, since the parking lot conversation, since every dispatcher who'd rerouted her into a dead end, and every customer who'd looked through her, and every form she'd filled out for assistance that went into a 6-week backlog. She'd been holding it because holding it was what she knew how to do. She sat in the car until her hands stopped. Then she took out her phone and found the unsaved number and typed, "Are you in the building?" The response came in under a minute. "No, downtown office." Why? She thought about what to say. She typed, "I did something that might make HR's Tuesday more interesting." A pause. Then, "Do I need to call legal?" "No. I told your operations manager that the advocacy office produces data, not feelings, and that company policy is signed by the board." Another pause. Longer. "Kowalski?" "Yes." "Good," he wrote. She looked at the word. 1 word, 4 letters, no embellishment. "Can we get coffee?" she typed. "Not today. This week." The pause this time was long enough that she wondered if she'd misjudged. If the door she thought had been left open had actually quietly closed while she wasn't looking. She sat in her car in the parking lot and waited, and the February sky did its non-committal, almost snow thing above her, and she waited. "Thursday," he wrote. "There's a place on Eastlake. Not fancy. Is 11 okay?" "11 is okay," she typed. She put the phone down. She started the car. She sat for another moment without putting it in gear, aware of the specific weight of a decision that wasn't large, technically. Coffee on a Thursday, 11 a.m., a place on Eastlake. But that was large in the way of things that open rather than close. She pulled out of the lot and drove home. Thursday arrived the way Thursdays do in February. Gray and unremarkable. The kind of day that makes no claims on itself and asks nothing of you aesthetically. The coffee place on Eastlake was a narrow room with exposed brick and tables that didn't match. The kind of place that had been there long enough to have earned its own permanent smell, coffee and old wood and something baked. Emma got there first. She took a table near the window, not near the door, which was different from her usual choice, and she registered the difference without spending much time on it. Mason came in at 11:04. He spotted her immediately, which meant he'd been looking for her, and he came to the table without hesitation, which meant he'd been thinking about this more than she had, probably. Or at least as much. He was not in a suit. He was in a jacket and a sweater, which was closer to the version she'd known in the parking lots, and this was both easier and harder than the suited version. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He sat down. They ordered coffee from a person who seemed entirely uninterested in them, which Emma found appropriate. They were quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortably. It was more like 2 people who'd been talking around each other for months and were now sitting in the fact of being in the same room by choice and taking a second to register that. "How's Ellie?" Emma asked. Something in his face relaxed slightly. "She wants a golden retriever named Captain." Emma went still. Then, "Did Noah?" "No. She came to it herself, apparently." He picked up his coffee cup. "I considered it a sign, in the secular sense." Emma looked at him. "A sign of what?" "That I should stop waiting for a better time to be honest and just be honest." He set the cup down. He met her eyes. "I'm not good at the between things. I'm good at building things, and I'm good at fixing things, and I'm genuinely bad at the part that's neither, where you're not building yet and there's nothing to fix, you're just being in a situation and letting it develop." He paused. "I spent 2 months trying to be strategic about this, and I think what I actually needed to do was just say, I'd like to know you. The correct version of knowing you, where I'm me and you know it, and I'd like Noah to know Ellie, eventually, if that's—" He stopped. "I'm saying too much." "You're saying exactly enough," Emma said. He looked at her. I'm not ready for whatever comes after this," she said. "I want to be clear. I'm not walking in here and handing you something. This is coffee." She looked at her cup. "But the door." I'd been trying to figure out whether it was still open or I'd let it close while I wasn't paying attention. And I think it's still open. She looked at him. I think I've been keeping it open, actually, without quite deciding to, which is its own answer. Mason was quiet for a moment. Not the processing kind of quiet, just the kind where someone is sitting in something they didn't expect to get and is taking a second to receive it properly. Okay, he said. That's all. Just okay? That's a lot, actually, he said. That's exactly enough. She held his gaze for a second, then she picked up her coffee. Tell me about Ellie. He told her about Ellie, the elephant Gerald and his recurring illnesses, the deep-sea documentary, the pancake days, the matter-of-fact way she'd told him he looked like he'd lost something important and should look harder. He told it the way parents tell stories about their children when they're talking to someone they're not performing for, which was loose and specific and occasionally backed up to correct a detail that wasn't quite right. Emma told him about Noah, the science journal, current contents of which now included a 3-page analysis of whether Captain should have one hat or two, and a drawing of a submarine with rocket boosters. The ongoing left shoe situation. The block corner diplomacy with Marcus, who had, it turned out, very strong opinions about structural engineering that Noah was respectfully challenging on a daily basis. They talked for an hour and 15 minutes. The coffee got refilled once. The person who served them remained thoroughly uninterested, which was still appropriate. When they stood to leave, Mason held the door for her in the ordinary way of someone who holds doors, not in the performative way that announces itself. She walked out onto East Lake in the February air, and they stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Saturday, Emma said. There's a thing at Noah's daycare, a family activity morning. They have it once a month. She paused. She was making a decision as she spoke, which was both unusual for her and she'd been learning sometimes necessary. You could come. With Ellie, it's... She stopped. It's dinosaurs this month, the theme. She looked at him. Noah would like it, and Ellie, maybe. Mason looked at her with the expression she'd first cataloged in her parking lot on day 4, standing next to the clumsy new driver who'd just clipped a parking barrier. The expression she now knew was him arriving at something he hadn't expected and taking a moment to let it be real. What time? He said. 9. I'll be there. She nodded once. She turned and walked to where her car was parked, 2 blocks down, and she didn't look back, and the almost snow was still making its indecisive suggestions from the gray sky. And Emma Brooks walked through it feeling something she was careful not to name yet, because naming it would make it something she had to manage. And she was learning, slowly, how to let things be what they were before she did anything about them. She got in the car, started it. The heater came on, the same reliable complaint of machinery that needed to warm up first, and she sat for a moment while it did. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Thank you, from the number she still hadn't saved. She looked at it for a second. Then she saved the contact. Not a formal name. Just Mason. She drove home. The family activity morning at Noah's daycare was held in a room decorated with approximately 400 paper dinosaurs of varying quality and ambition, which Emma found somewhat overwhelming in the way that well-intentioned daycare events often were. Noah saw Mason from across the room. For a moment, Emma watched her son process what he was seeing, the recalibration happening visibly, the child's version of context shifting, the way Noah's face went from the general scan of a 5-year-old looking for known things to the specific recognition of something known from somewhere unexpected. And then, Mike! Mason crouched down to Noah's level as Noah arrived at speed, which Mason managed without stumbling, which suggested he had practice with this particular type of arrival. Hey, buddy. You came. Noah said this with the satisfaction of someone whose faith in the universe had been empirically confirmed. Mama said maybe, and maybe usually means yes. Does it? Mason said. She has a system. Noah registered the small person next to Mason, who was looking at him with the cautious curiosity of a 7-year-old encountering a new situation and collecting data before committing to anything. Who are you? Ellie, said Ellie. Do you like dinosaurs? Ellie considered this with appropriate seriousness. Some of them. Which ones? The ones with feathers. Noah's eyes went wide. Some of them had feathers? Yeah, Ellie said. A lot of them. It's a whole thing. Noah turned to Emma with the expression of a person whose worldview has just expanded significantly and who needs a moment. Mama, feathers. I know, baby. Why didn't you? It just didn't come up. Noah turned back to Ellie. You have to tell me everything. Ellie, who had been quietly skeptical of the morning's premise right up until this moment, made a small decision that Emma could see from 10 feet away. Okay, she said, but you have to show me the best dinosaurs here first. They went. Together, immediately, in the direction of the paper dinosaur display, Noah already talking, Ellie already asking pointed questions about structural accuracy. Emma and Mason stood in the middle of the room and watched them go. Feathers, Mason said. She's not wrong, Emma said. She's completely right. It's... He stopped. She's going to be the most informed person in that conversation within 5 minutes. Noah will be okay with that. He likes people who know things. They stood side by side. Around them, the room hummed with the particular frequency of a daycare family event. Other parents with coffee, children demonstrating dinosaur facts at high volume, a teacher trying to organize a craft activity that had already devolved into creative chaos. Normal Saturday morning noise, the kind that's simultaneously exhausting and oddly comforting. Emma put her hands in her jacket pockets. She's good, she said. Ellie. She is. Mason was watching his daughter explain something to Noah using hand gestures that suggested significant structural analysis. She's better than me at most things. I'm aware of this. Noah is better than me at letting things be okay, Emma said. I've been trying to learn it from him. Mason looked at her sideways. Is it working? She thought about the phone saved in her pocket, the door she'd been keeping open without deciding to, the coffee on Thursday, and the almost snow. Slowly, she said. Yeah, slowly. He nodded, not pushing, not asking for more than what she'd handed him, just receiving it and standing in it, the way she'd told him she needed, back in December, in the new carpet room. Not fixing, just understanding. She was starting to believe he'd actually heard her. That mattered. It mattered more than she'd known how to say back then. It still did. On the other side of the room, Noah was now showing Ellie the paper dinosaurs with the proprietary pride of a host giving a tour. Ellie was examining one critically and appeared to be offering a structural note about the tail length. Noah was considering it seriously rather than defending his assessment, which Emma noted with something between pride and amusement. She thought about what it might look like, slowly, incrementally. 2 kids who already made each other better in the first 20 minutes. 2 parents standing in a daycare on a Saturday, not there yet, but not there either, somewhere in the approach that wasn't the beginning and wasn't the destination. She thought it looked maybe like something that could work. She was not going to say that out loud yet, but she was thinking it, and the thinking was enough for now. And she let it sit in the warm, crowded room among the paper dinosaurs and the morning coffee and the ordinary noise of families being families, and she did not rush it. Some things took a while to be ready. And then they told you. March came in slow and wet, the way Seattle marches always did, as if the city needed the extra time to transition from one season's particular shade of gray to the next. The trees on Beacon Hill were doing the first hesitant thing with their buds. Not committed, not yet, just suggesting the possibility of leaves. And Emma noticed this on her morning drives to daycare with Noah, the suggestion of something returning, and thought about how you could go years without noticing trees, and then one morning you're noticing them constantly, and you can't remember what changed. She knew what changed. She just wasn't cataloging it out loud yet. The advocacy office had hit its 4-month mark. The root buffer time pilot had expanded to 6 zones, and the retention data from the first 2 was already trending the way Tomas's projections had predicted, which Tomas had not said I told you so about, and which Dale had said I told you so about on behalf of the whole room. The Emergency Assistance Program had processed 47 applications since January, with a response rate of 100% within the 24-hour window, which Emma tracked personally because someone should and because the number was not abstract to her. Each one of those 47 was a person who'd had a Tuesday night go sideways and had somewhere to turn. She thought about the complaint file she'd never seen, the one that had called her the woman with the kid, and whether the person who filed that note was still at the company. She'd asked Renata once, obliquely. Renata had said the position had been eliminated in a restructuring that had nothing to do with Emma specifically, and everything to do with the restructuring being real. Emma had accepted this as the partial answer it was and moved on. She was getting better at accepting partial answers. Not because she'd lowered her standards for honesty, but because she'd gotten better at knowing which questions mattered most and focusing her energy there. The question that mattered most currently was not a work question. It had been 6 weeks since the dinosaur morning at Noah's daycare. In those 6 weeks, 2 more coffees on Eastlake, both running past the hour either of them had planned for. One afternoon when Mason had brought Ellie to the park near Emma's building, and the 4 of them had spent 2 hours navigating the specific democracy of a playground involving 2 children with strong opinions, which had required considerably more diplomatic effort than the driver advocacy office, and had also been, Emma admitted to herself, considerably more fun. One evening, this one still sat in her chest in a way she hadn't fully sorted, when Mason had called at 9:30 because Ellie had asked him a question he didn't know how to answer alone. "She wants to know about her mom," he'd said, his voice quiet and careful. "She's been asking more lately, and tonight she asked if her mom would have liked me the way I am now, or just the way I was before." A pause. I didn't know what to say. Emma had been sitting at her kitchen table, Noah asleep, the apartment quiet. She'd put her hand flat on the table in the way she did when she was about to say something true. "What did you tell her?" "I said I thought her mom would have wanted the version of me that's trying to be better, and that the trying is the part that matters more than the arriving." He paused. "I got that from somewhere. I don't remember where." "It's a good answer," Emma said. "Is it? I don't know. She seemed okay with it. She went to sleep." Another pause, the kind that had weight. "I just needed to tell someone how I answered it, to see if it was the right call." Emma sat with that, the specific thing he'd needed, not to be told what to say, not to be managed through it, just to read it back to someone who would tell him honestly. "It was the right call," she said. "Okay." The exhale on his end was quiet and real. "Thank you. How's she doing, overall?" She's okay. She has the kind of resilience that makes you grateful and also a little worried because you can't always tell what it's covering." He paused. "She told me last week that Gerald the elephant is ready for a friend. She's very specific that Gerald wants a dog, not another elephant. She's done the research." "The research," Emma said. She asked her teacher. Apparently Mrs. Kim's golden retriever, Biscuit, came for show and tell, and Ellie has been consulting with Biscuit's owner ever since about the viability of golden retrievers as companions for stuffed elephants. Emma pressed her lips together to hold something in. "And the verdict?" "Apparently very positive. Mrs. Kim says Biscuit is deeply committed to stuffed animals of all species." "That's a data point," Emma said. "It is." A pause. "Emma." "Yeah. I know we're taking it slow. I know that's the right thing, and I'm not pushing. But I want you to know that this—" He stopped, started again. "The phone calls, the coffee, the park. This is not nothing to me. I want to be clear about that because I think the last time I wasn't clear about something important, it cost us both something we didn't have to lose." Emma was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had started up again, the patient kind. "It's not nothing to me either," she said. "That's clear enough for right now." She heard him breathe. "Okay," he said. "Okay, yeah. That's enough." She'd sat at the table for a while after they hung up, listening to the rain, thinking about the strange arithmetic of trust. How it went, how it came back, how the coming back was slower and had different dimensions than the original, and was somehow also more solid for having been rebuilt deliberately rather than just extended by default. She'd been extended by default before. With Ryan, mostly. Assuming good faith because assuming anything else was exhausting, and then paying the cost of that assumption in the form of Sunday calls and canceled weekends and a child who had developed a filing system for paternal disappointment. She was not doing that again. But she was also not going to let one experience with the wrong version of assumption calcify into a refusal to extend anything at all. That was its own kind of cost, and she'd been paying it for long enough. She went to bed. She slept reasonably well. The rain kept going outside and did not care either way, and she found that comforting. The company picnic was Mason's idea, and like most of Mason's ideas, it was simultaneously correct and slightly more complicated in execution than he'd anticipated. The concept was simple. A family event for quick call employees, open to drivers and office staff and warehouse workers and dispatchers, held at a park on the south end of Lake Washington in late May, when the weather could be counted on with something approaching reliability. No corporate agenda, no speeches, no team-building exercises designed by someone who'd read about vulnerability in a leadership book. Just a park, tables, food, and the particular awkward warmth of people who work together occupying the same space without the job as the organizing structure. The catering was Mason's doing. He'd gone back and forth with Renata about it. She'd suggested a vendor they used for corporate events, the kind of setup with chafing dishes and attendants in white jackets. Mason had said no. He'd ended up at a sandwich place on Capitol Hill that Dale had mentioned once in passing, the kind of place where the bread was made the same morning and the sandwiches were built on the counter while you watched. He'd ordered enough for 400 people and then personally picked up and delivered the first load because the catering van had a flat and he was closer. This was how Mason Hart arrived at the Quick Haul Company picnic, carrying a large tray of sandwiches, which he set on a folding table, and then went back to his car and carried another one, and then another, while employees from various departments stood around watching their billionaire CEO do a very familiar activity with a specific competence of someone who had done it for 3 weeks in the rain. Dale watched this from a lawn chair and said nothing, which was the loudest thing Dale had said in months. Emma arrived at 11:15 with Noah and found the park already populated. Kids running on the grass, clusters of drivers she recognized, the dispatcher named Grace from the advocacy office talking to 2 people Emma didn't know from what she guessed was the tech team, based on their collective inability to dress for outdoor weather. The lake was doing what the lake did in late May, which was be genuinely beautiful in the uncomplicated way of large bodies of water on clear days, reflecting back a sky that for once in Seattle had committed to being blue. Noah was out of the car before she'd fully stopped. "Ellie!" He'd spotted her 40 feet away, which was either excellent vision or the particular GPS children develop for people they've decided are important. He ran. Ellie turned from wherever she'd been standing and ran back, which was the greeting of people who had been conducting an ongoing collaboration, the feather research, the captain planning sessions conducted over the phone, with Emma holding the receiver down to Noah while Mason held it toward Ellie, and needed to get back to work. Emma stood by her car and watched them converge on the grass and felt something so ordinary and so large simultaneously that she had to just let it sit in her chest without doing anything about it. Mason appeared from the direction of the folding tables, carrying nothing now, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He was the CEO of a company employing thousands of people, and he had just finished hand-delivering sandwiches to a park, and he looked, she searched for the word and found it, relieved, like someone who had been carrying the other thing for a long time and had put it down for the afternoon. "You found it," he said when he reached her. "Dale texted me very specific parking instructions. I think he's been here since 7. He helped set up the tables. He won't admit this." Mason looked out at the park. "Is it okay? The setup?" Emma looked at him. He was asking genuinely, not performing humility, actually asking, the way someone asks when they've worked at something and care whether it landed. "It's good," she said. "It's really good." Renata wanted a photo booth. "You were right to say no." "I said no to 3 different photo booth vendors." He looked slightly haunted. They kept finding new angles. She laughed, the real one, the short, sudden one that surprised her. He looked at her when she laughed the way people look at something that they value having caused and don't want to make a point of. They walked out onto the grass together, toward the tables, toward the noise of 400 people occupying a park on a May afternoon. Not holding hands, not performing anything, just walking in the same direction at the same pace, which was its own statement, and they both knew it. Tomas intercepted them near the food tables with the agenda-free energy of someone who had been set loose from a meeting structure for the first time in months. He was carrying a paper plate loaded with alarming ambition. "Emma, heart!" He nodded at Mason with the particular nod of someone who had reviewed his board reports and found them acceptable. "Good sandwiches." "Thank you," Mason said. "The bread is good." "Who did the bread?" "Place on Capitol Hill, driver recommendation." Tomas pointed his fork at Mason in a gesture of endorsement. "That's the move. Always the driver recommendation." He moved on. Mason looked at Emma. "Was that approval?" "From Tomas? Yeah, that's basically a standing ovation." They got food and found a table near the water, and Ellie and Noah appeared from wherever they'd been. Breathless, grass-stained, mid-conversation about something that seemed to involve both feathers and submarines, which was the intersection of their scientific interests, and ate about half of what was on their plates before being pulled back toward the grass by the gravitational force of other children and unresolved theories. Emma watched them go. "She's good for him," she said. "Ellie, she pushes back." "He's good for her," Mason said. "He just accepts things, takes them at face value." He was watching Ellie too. She doesn't have a lot of people in her life who just accept her. Most people are either managing her or slightly intimidated by her. Noah manages no one. It's a principled stance. "I've noticed." He picked up his sandwich. "He asked me last week on the phone whether Captain should have a collar with his name on it or a tag. I said tag. He said he'd need to think about it. He'll come back to you on that. He has a process." "I'm aware." He gave me a timeline. Emma looked at him sideways. "You two talk on the phone without me?" "He called my number. I don't know how he got it. I have a suspicion it was Ellie." Emma filed this away for a conversation she was going to have with Ellie at some point about data privacy, which was also a conversation she was going to have with herself about what it meant that she was not entirely opposed to the breach. They sat at the table with the lake in front of them and the noise of the picnic around them and ate their sandwiches, which were genuinely very good. The bread had the quality of something made with actual attention. "The board meeting last week," Emma said. "Yeah." "The Kowalski situation." Mason set down his sandwich. He told her about it. Kowalski had, 2 weeks after Emma's hallway conversation with him, filed a formal grievance through HR claiming the advocacy office was overstepping its mandate. HR had reviewed it. The board had reviewed HR's review. The conclusion had been that the advocacy office was operating exactly within its mandate and that Kowalski's grievance reflected a misunderstanding of the mandate's scope. Kowalski had, following this conclusion, elected to take early retirement. The decision was framed as voluntary, and Mason had let it be framed that way because the alternative was a termination that would have become a story, and the story would have become the headline instead of the work. "I should have moved on him sooner," Mason said, "after what happened at headquarters. He was part of the culture that produced that room." "You didn't have the documentation yet," Emma said. "I had enough." She looked at him. "You're still doing that. The retrospective judgment." "I know." He picked up the sandwich again. "Occupational hazard. I replay decisions. It's not useful past a certain point." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You're very good at telling me true things in a way that doesn't feel like a verdict." "I've had practice," she said. 5-year-olds require it constantly." He smiled. Not the performing version, the real one, which she'd learned to tell apart. It sat in the corner of his mouth and reached his eyes slightly and was gone before it fully arrived. The smile of someone who didn't entirely trust good things yet, but was working on it. She understood that. She was working on it too. Dale found her by the water at 2:30. He had the walk of a man who'd been sitting in a lawn chair for 3 hours and was now working the stiffness out, and he had his hands in his pockets and the expression of someone who had a thing to say and was deciding how to say it. "Nice event," he said. "It is." "Good sandwiches." "Mason told me you helped set up." "I don't know what you're talking about." He stood next to her, looking at the lake. "You seem good," he said finally. "Different good, not the same good as before." "Different how?" less held. You always held a lot. You're still holding it, but differently, like you moved it to a different arm. He glanced at her. That's a weird thing to say. It makes sense, actually. He was quiet for a moment. Two kids ran past them toward the water's edge, not Noah, not Ellie, just the general population of children at large in a park. Ryan called me, Dale said. Emma turned to look at him. Why did Ryan call you? We have a number. From before, when you two... He shrugged. He asked how you were doing. I told him you were fine. He asked about Noah. I told him Noah was great and had very advanced theories about dogs. He paused. He said he'd been showing up for the visits. He has, Emma said. Mostly. He said he thinks you're doing better. I am. He said, and I'm telling you this because it happened and it seems like something you should know. He said he was glad. Dale turned back to the lake. He wasn't laying claim to anything. He just said he was glad. For you and for Noah. He paused. For what it's worth, I believed him. Emma stood at the edge of the lake at the Quick-Hall family picnic in May, with the blue sky above her and the water in front of her, and the sound of 400 people having an ordinary good time behind her, and thought about Ryan saying he was glad. She didn't have a complicated feeling about it. That was the thing. She'd expected to have a complicated feeling, and instead she had a simple one. She was glad he was glad. She hoped he kept showing up. She hoped Noah's filing system got to hold fewer disappointments and more Saturday mornings, and that Ryan would find his way to the version of himself that was reliable, the way people sometimes did when they finally stopped running from the work of it. She did not need him to get there for her sake. She needed him to get there for Noah's. Tell him thank you, she said. If he calls again? Dale nodded. He didn't say anything else about it, which was the correct instinct. They stood by the water for a minute, the comfortable silence of two people who'd shared parking lots in the rain for years. Heart's good for you, Dale said eventually. Dale, I said what I said. He started walking back toward the lawn chairs. The sandwiches were good, he said again over his shoulder, which was his way of ending a topic. Emma stood by the water a little longer. At 4 o'clock, Noah found a worm. This was not a small event. Noah found the worm near a tree root at the edge of the grass and treated it with the reverence of someone who had discovered something scientifically significant, which in his framework he had. He immediately needed both Ellie and Mason and Emma to come and see it, and all three came, and they stood around a small child crouching over a patch of dirt, looking at a worm, which was the most ordinary thing in the world, and which Emma found, for reasons she didn't examine too carefully, unexpectedly moving. Is it okay? Noah asked. He was not touching it, just observing, which showed the scientific discipline Ellie had been reinforcing. It's fine, Mason said. Worms like the surface after rain. It didn't rain today. It rained last night. Noah looked up at him. How do you know about worms? I had a phase, Mason said. What phase? A worm phase. I was about your age. I kept them in a jar. Noah's eyes went wide with the recognition of a fellow scholar. I want to keep this one. But he lives here, Emma said. I could visit? You can visit, Mason said. He'll be here. They don't go far. Noah accepted this with the pragmatic nod of someone filing it as a commitment. He stood up. He looked at Mason, then at Emma, then back at Mason. Are you going to come to more stuff? He asked. He said it with the directness of a child who has decided that important questions deserve direct asking, which was something he'd been doing more of lately, the asking directly, and which Emma suspected was at least partly Ellie's influence. Mason looked at Emma. Emma looked at Noah. What kind of stuff? She asked. Like this stuff. And the park. And dinner. He was holding his ground with the earnestness of someone who has given this thought. We have pasta a lot. You can have pasta too. Noah, Emma started. Can he? Noah looked at her, not challenging, just asking, just a kid who wanted the people he liked to be in the same place, which was one of the most reasonable things Emma had ever heard stated. She looked at Mason. He was waiting, not pushing, not filling the silence with something that would make it easier. Just waiting the way she'd needed him to wait, and he'd gotten better at it, and she'd noticed. Yeah, Emma said. He can. Noah's face did the thing it did when good things were confirmed. He turned to Mason with the satisfied air of someone whose position has been vindicated. Tuesday is pasta night, he said. Don't be late. Mama starts without people. I won't be late, Mason said. Okay. Noah looked back at the worm. I'm going to say goodbye. They let him. He crouched back down and said something to the worm that none of them could hear, which was appropriate. Some conversations were private. Then he stood and ran back toward where the other children were and was absorbed back into the afternoon. Emma and Mason stood by the tree. Ellie had drifted off in pursuit of Grace's daughter, who was closer to her age and who she'd been conducting a careful getting-to-know-you process with for the last hour. Tuesday, Emma said. Tuesday, he confirmed. She looked at him. He was not performing ease. She could see the thing underneath it that was not ease, the awareness that this was something, that she had said something real, that the door she'd been keeping open had just moved further on its hinges, not flung wide, but moved, significantly, with intent. Don't bring anything expensive, she said. Noah will be suspicious. What should I bring? She thought about it. He's working on the Captain Caller question. If you bring a proposed design that's better than his current one, he'll respect you for it. Mason looked at her for a second. Are we getting a dog? The question landed in the air between them. Not dramatic, not a big moment, just a question with a large answer inside it, the kind that contained other questions. Are we, the particular we of people who have been carefully not saying we, and are now saying it, getting, the forward tense of something continuing, a dog, which was both a dog and an entire future of ordinary Tuesdays and park afternoons, and children who had already decided without consulting anyone. I think that's probably where this is going, Emma said. Mason looked at the lake, then back at her. He had the expression of a man who had spent 8 years building things and was currently in the presence of something he hadn't built and couldn't build. Something that was just happening, incrementally, in parking lots and coffee shops and daycare rooms and by a tree root where a child said goodbye to a worm. Okay, he said. You're going to have to do a lot of caller research. I'll call Noah tonight. He'll want a conference in Ellie. Obviously. She looked at him. He looked at her. The picnic continued around them. Dale in his lawn chair, Tomas with his paper plate, Grace talking to the tech team, 400 people and their children, and the May afternoon in the lake doing what it did. Emma had spent 4 years on routes that started before the city woke up. She'd spent those years in the particular company of her own competence, learning which buildings had broken buzzers, which customers needed 2 rings, which routes cut 6 minutes off a loop, and which dispatcher would actually pick up when you had a problem. She'd been alone in the practical sense for most of it. Not always lonely, but always alone. And she'd built that aloneness into something functional and protective and occasionally suffocating. She'd been afraid that letting someone in would cost her the architecture she'd built, that the competence she'd developed would somehow be undermined by needing someone. That needing was a vulnerability she couldn't afford when Noah needed her to be solid. What she'd learned, slowly, through a fixed elevator and a letter on a kitchen table and 2 cups of tea at 11 p.m., and a Thursday coffee that ran long and a Saturday morning full of paper dinosaurs, was that the architecture didn't dissolve when someone was in it. It just became a building with more than one person, which was a different structure but not a weaker one. She'd had to learn that herself. Nobody could have told her. That was probably the most important thing. That some knowledge had to be arrived at through the actual time, the actual weeks, the actual accumulation of small, true moments. You couldn't shortcut it. You couldn't be rescued into it. You had to walk toward it in increments, with all your doubts intact, and arrive at it honestly or not at all. She had arrived honestly. She was still arriving. That was okay. Dursets. The drive home was Noah in the back seat, asleep within 6 minutes of leaving the park. One shoe off because he'd somehow lost it between the parking lot and the car and had found it under the seat and then held it rather than putting it back on, which was peak Noah. The left shoe, of course. Emma drove through the early evening with the windows cracked slightly because the air was finally, genuinely warm. The first real warmth of the year, and the city looked different in it. Softer, more willing. The gray that characterized most of Seattle's year temporarily suspended. She thought about what came next, not in the anxious way, not the contingency planning way, just the ordinary thinking about what Tuesday would look like. And the pasta, and Noah explaining the caller situation with the full gravity it deserved, and whether Ellie would come and what Ellie and Noah would do with an actual dinner table and two parents in the room who were figuring out how to be in the same room. She thought about the advocacy office and the driver retention curves and Tomas's projections and the 47 people who'd gotten emergency assistance and the elevator on Madison that ran quietly and reliably every day now. She thought about the meeting she had next week with Renata and two board members to discuss expanding the buffer time pilot to the full fleet, which was going to require a conversation about operational modeling that she was genuinely looking forward to in a way she hadn't expected when she took the role. She thought about what it meant to be in a room where decisions got made and to be one of the people making them rather than one of the people absorbing them. 4 years ago, she'd been a name in a complaint file, and someone had called her the woman with the kid in a meeting she wasn't in, and that had mattered enough to a man with floor-to-ceiling windows to put on a gray uniform and come down from the 42nd floor and carry a bag through the rain. She still had complicated feelings about that. She thought she probably always would. The complications were part of it. The things that had happened couldn't unhappen, and she wasn't interested in the version where they were erased or minimized or turned into a clean narrative with a bow on it. The bow wasn't the point. The actual texture of it was the point. The difficulty and the working through and the arriving slowly at something that was real in the way that only real things were, with all the rough edges showing. She turned onto her street. Noah made a small sound in the back seat that wasn't quite words and then settled back into sleep. She thought about what Dale had said. Less held. She'd moved it to a different arm. That was right, she thought. She was still carrying it. The history of the last 4 years, the loans and the roots, and the Ryan of it all, and the particular aloneness of building a life mostly by herself. She didn't put that down. She'd earned it. It had made her into the person who could sit in a room and say, this is not feelings, this is data with enough authority that someone changed the policy. She just wasn't carrying it alone anymore. And Noah would grow up with his science journal with the rocket on the cover, and his theories about dogs and dinosaurs and submarines and whatever came next, with Ryan trying, with Ellie's particular brand of rigorous friendship, with a man who had learned the hard way, and probably late, that the most important room to walk into was the one where you told the truth about who you were. None of it was going to be clean. Tuesday's pasta dinner was going to be loud, and Noah was going to demonstrate the collar designs with physical intensity, and someone was probably going to spill something, and Ellie was going to have a research-based opinion about the optimal collar material, and Emma was going to try to cook pasta for 4 people without burning it, which she had not always successfully done for 2. It was going to be something that a photograph couldn't hold, which was fine, because she wasn't interested in the photograph. She was interested in the actual evening, the specific particular mess and warmth of it, the thing you could only get by being in it. She pulled into the parking spot outside her building, turned off the car, sat for a moment in the settling quiet. In the back seat, Noah slept with his left shoe held in one hand and a grass stain on his right knee from a park in May, and his face in sleep had the expression that sleeping children have, the total absence of the world's weight, the face that knows nothing yet about how things can go wrong and is the better for not knowing. She was not going to let that face down. She never had. She wasn't starting now. She got out of the car and got Noah out. He woke slightly, enough to process that they were home and to say, the worm was good, which she chose to interpret as a verdict on the whole afternoon, and carried him inside and got him into bed and picked up the left shoe from where he dropped it at the door. She put the shoe by the couch. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table, which had no letter on it now, just a table, just the ordinary surface of an ordinary life that she had built by hand and was still building. Her phone was on the table. She looked at it. She picked it up and texted Mason. He's already thinking about the worm. You should know what you're getting into. The response came fast. I visited a worm phase for 2 years at age 6. I'm prepared. She smiled, set the phone down. She thought about a thing she'd understood somewhere between December and now, something she couldn't have articulated before she'd lived it, that the people who changed your life weren't always the ones who rescued you from it. Sometimes they were the ones who sat down inside it with you, in the parking lots, in the difficult hours, in the rooms where real things got decided, and stayed. Not because they had to, not because it was easy or clean or certain, because they chose to every time and kept choosing. That was what trust was built from. Not a single act, not a grand gesture, not a declaration, just the daily choosing, day after day, to show up and be honest about who you were. Mason was learning that. She was learning to let him. They were both still learning, which was the only version she trusted anyway. Outside, the May evening had gone full dark, the city lights doing their thing against the sky. And somewhere across Seattle, a man was probably looking at his phone and thinking about pasta and collar designs, and a small boy who had taken him seriously on the subject of a worm, and finding in all of this something that the 42nd floor and the board reports and the glass tower had never quite been able to give him. And in a small apartment on Beacon Hill, a woman sat at her kitchen table drinking tea and let herself be glad about where she was. Not rescued, not fixed, just here. Which was, it turned out, exactly enough.